Hello, people watching. Okay, so to my subscribers who are maybe watching this, I don't know. This is kind of a voice review or reveal, sorry. But look in the description because I'm gonna explain a lot more about why oh my god, your videos are gone. So that'll help. But to anyone new, I'm gonna be reading Wattpad fanfictions. Now this is gonna be a suggestive thing, so you can suggest any fandom, any type. I don't really care, I'll just read it for you because it's gonna be like an audible book of sorts, except it's Wattpad and it's really up to you guys. But I'm gonna be starting off with Flowers from 1970, and I've read this before, so hopefully I won't cry. Yeah, sorry, if this audio is bad. This is my first time doing this, and I'm trying to do it better, and I will be trying to read this as well as I can, because I'm not that good of a, public speaker, so please just bear with me. George walked up the steps of his house, keys in hand and a dark look on his face. The neighborhood had been quiet except for the occasional passing car, which did not help his ongoing battle of isolation and loneliness. The quieter it was, the louder his thoughts were, and so as he entered his empty house, which housed a quiet so large the drop of a pin would be highly audible, his head filled with massive concepts. He trudged his way up to his room, carrying his jacket in his hand as he threw his keys onto a desk and collapsed onto his bed. He waited a while, his mind the only thing keeping him company. And it wasn't good company. All he had were regrets and scenarios of brighter futures. He had made decisions in the past. Suddenly, he heard a ring come from the other side of the room. It wasn't coming from his cell phone, but from a vintage telephone he had found in his house when he first moved in. He had spent weeks trying to repair it, but eventually gave up. But now it seemed to be fully operational. He ran to the phone and answered. Hello? Hey, Zap, can you believe Governor Schlatt had a heart attack and died today? That's insane. A man on the other end of the phone mumbled into the phone. I'm sorry, but you have the wrong number. Today? George asked, confused. Oh, well, sorry then, but yeah, today, it's all over papers. Voice answered, not bothering to end the call, even though it's the wrong number. George raised his brow. Are you talking about Governor Schlatt of Florida? Yeah, who else? The man said. The man answered, his shrug visible in his tone. Schlatt died over 50 years ago, though. George was convinced he was talking to either someone very uneducated or downright insane. The man laughed loudly. I don't know about you, but I don't remember Schlatt dying in 1920. Now, George knew the man couldn't do math right. 50 years ago was not 1920. Everyone knows it happened in 1970. Then his right-hand man, Jack, was almost assassinated the next day, George told the man. He did not know why he was so hell-bent on correcting a stranger, but he did so nonetheless. Jack? Everybody loves Jack. He's fine and giving a speech right now. Listen. The phone sounded like it was moving, and suddenly he put up to a radio. The radio was barely audible, but George could make out a few words like, this is a tragic loss, and such. Definitely sounded like Jack. George figured he was talking to a crazy person and hung up. He walked over to his bed, thought about the phone call for no more than 3 minutes before falling asleep. Part 2. It was the next day. George brought up a bowl of cereal to his room to eat. He seemed to stare at his cell phone, waiting for calls and texts of, how are you, from people that never seemed to come. He booted up his computer to watch videos when suddenly the old telephone started ringing again. George hesitated for a bit. Did he really want to talk to a crazy person again? Then again, it wasn't like there was anyone else that would talk to him. He sighed and picked up the phone. Hello. How did you know? Man had said into the phone. What? About Jack. How someone was going to attempt to kill him today. Yeah, seriously. George rolled his eyes. I told you. Everyone in the state knows. We learned about it in school and everything. Didn't you? Also, why do you keep saying today? Today. What's the date for you? The man asked George. George tapped his phone, checked the date. July 8th, 2020. No response. Just heavy breathing that sounded like hyperventilating. After a while, the man spoke again softly. It's July 28th, 1970 here. Now, this was confirmation that whoever George was talking to was crazy. Like, if this is some kind of prank, I'm just going to hang up. This isn't my phone, and I'm not Sap or whoever that is. Wait! The man yelled. Do you live on 821 Manberg Street? George started freaking out. If the man knew his address, he was going to call and contact the police or don't freak out. The man read his mind. That's my old house. Well, it's my old house for you, but I live there right now. Does the upstairs bedroom still have a hideous flower wallpaper? George answered yes. George answered hesitantly. That means they haven't changed it since I lived there. Give me a sec. The man was silent for a while until George heard a clicking sound, which was a pen uncapping. What are you doing? George asked. Look in the corner of the wall near the window, the man told him. Why? Just do it. George heard what sounded like scribbling on the other side of the phone. George hesitated, but walked away to the corner of the room. What am I supposed to be looking at? Suddenly, worn out pen marks started appearing on the wall slowly, like burning wood. Hi, it said. Do you see that? The man on the other side of the phone asked, before audibly capping his pen again. Yes. George was hyperventilating, clutching his chest. This surely was not possible. Who are you? They both asked at the same time. But the man answered first. My name is Dream. Dream, George raised a brow. It's a nickname. I don't want to give you my real name yet, since you could be some government spy or something. George chuckled. Well, I'm George. So tell me, George, who wins the World Series next year? Asking for a friend. Dream asked half jokingly. I'm afraid I can't tell you that, George. George responded. Well, technically I can, but morally it's pretty wrong. Darn, thought that was going to work. Dream test. So tell me about the future. Wait, does that sound dirty? Tell me about 2020. Well, part 3. I can't tell you much. Isn't it science fiction common knowledge that telling someone of the past too much would mess up the future? George told Dream. I suppose you're right, Dream sighed. Well, I know that I moved out since you live in my house now. So who's Sap? George asked. My friend. We call him Sapnap, and I'm guessing you have his telephone. But I don't know why it would have ended up there at my house. Really? That's what you're confused about? What about the whole talking to someone from a different time part? George mentioned. Obviously, I'm confused too. It's like George could hear his eye roll. So how old are you? 24. George didn't know why he was telling this to a stranger, but his loneliness and desperation got to the best of him. I'm 21, Dream answered, with no hesitation. And George only assumed that he was a confident sort of man. What do you do for a living? George let curiosity replace his anxiety for a magical phone. Dream chuckled. I coach baseball for little kids. I love baseball. What about you? Do I love baseball, or what do I do for a living? Why not answer both? I got time. George lied down on his bed and stared up at the ceiling. Not that into sports. Also, I program video games for computers for a living. What kind of job is that? George smiled. I forgot you probably don't know what those are yet. Yeah, hello, I'm in the past, Dream joked. George laughed. Well, I have to go. I should sleep. Boo, Dream groaned into the phone. As fun as it was talking to Dream, it was getting late into the night and he had projects to finish. Goodbye, wrong number. Dream bid him goodbye. Goodbye, old man. Goodbye, old man. Hey, I'm not old yet. Dream laughed before hanging up. Part 4. It had been a week since Dream and George had started talking, and needless to say, they had become good friends. George had started eating lunch in his room, awaiting a phone call around the same time every day, and again with dinner one night. They talked about anything and everything, including their childhoods and favorite things from their time. Dream had made George promise not to look for him 2020, or try to Google him, whatever that was. So George kept his promise, and they continued to speak as if the only distance between them was miles, and not time. It's weird we can't physically communicate. I mean, we can, but I'm assuming you're old. George laughed. I have an idea, Dream said after a while. He left the phone on his dresser and told Dream he'd be back. George waited patiently, counting the many flowers on his wall, when he heard a faint voice come from the phone again. What's your idea? George asked, turning to his side on the pillow. Go to the wall next to the window, Dream urged George. George groaned, indicating his tiredness, but Dream insisted he go. Grudgingly, he got up and walked to the wall next to the window, as Dream told him to. Now what? Dream stood by the window. The walls where he was in time were much newer and intact than George's. He had come from a shed with a bucket of lime green paint. He pinned the phone between his cheek and shoulder and opened the paint can. Dream, what are you doing? He heard George ask. Just look at the wall, Dream said as he took a brush and applied a thin coat of paint on his entire hand. Ready? Dream said into the phone. George sighed. Yes, though I don't know exactly what I'm ready for. George waited at the wall, whistling. Suddenly, lime paint started appearing on the wall. It was appearing slowly and a bit chipped and worn out, but there nonetheless. George, are you there? I hope you see it and no one erased it after I moved out. Dream talked into the phone. It was a handprint. Seemingly former lime green handprint. It was darker and faint now. Dream stayed silent and absentmindedly put his own hand over the handprint. Dream's hand seemed bigger than his and with slightly longer fingers. George? Dream called out, and George pulled his hand away quickly. Yeah, I see it. And George chuckled. Did you hold my hand? Dream asked. What? George shook up, but Dream started laughing. Calm down, I'm kidding. George could hear his smile. I wonder what else we could try out. George sat on his bed, still looking at the handprint. Wonder why you've never visited. What? Dream questioned. Why future you hasn't visited me yet since we started talking? Like why you never came on July 29th to tell me you're the one I'm talking to? George pondered curiously. Maybe I'm dead, James said half jokingly. George hated that font. It was possible, and he fought back his urge to Google him and find out everything he could about Dream. The only information he had was that he lived here before, and Dream didn't want George to go looking for him. They bid each other good night, and George fell asleep on his side, staring at the green handprint on the wall. Part 5. Dream and George found other ways to communicate, with George having the brilliant idea of Dream leaving a time capsule buried somewhere in the backyard for George to find. George uploaded his work project onto his computer and walked outside with a shovel he had recently purchased. Dream had told him it was put in the corner near the fence, and had hoped no one had taken it out since it was put in. With that information, George started to dig. He wasn't the strongest physically, but he persisted with each shovel into the cold dirt. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw someone looking at him. It must have looked weird to be digging a hole in your backyard. He must have looked like he was digging a grave to dump a body in. George shrugged at the man, which prompted him to walk away. The man went quickly into a pocket notebook while he was walking away and wrote something down. George was scared of his notes about him being suspicious and he was going to report to the police. It had been over 15 minutes and George sighed. He took a look at the pile of dirt on the ground and shook his head. Someone must have found the capsule for him. He was about to shovel the dirt he worked so hard on digging out back into the hole when a glimmer of light reached his eyes. There, buried into the ground, was a hint of metal. George's eyes widened as he ran for the shovel again, picking up off the ground until he found a pill-shaped metal container. It had masking tape on it with the word George written. He'd not even bother shoveling the dirt back in. He ran back home to rinse off the outside of the container and shuffled into his room. Right on time, the phone started ringing. George picked up. Dream, I've got your capsule. Dream chuckled. So you do. Well, open it. I'm curious how long the things in there survived. It took George a while, as the rust created a sort of lock in between the seams, but eventually it popped open with such a force, George was thrown back a little off the ground. You alright? Dream asked worriedly into the phone. George got back up. Yeah, just fine. A couple of things inside the capsule scattered around the floor due to how it opened. George grabbed the first thing he saw. He squinted at it. Pouch-u? He tried to read on the wrapper. Yes, Dream said excitedly. I love those. What is this? He held it up to his nose and sniffed it. It smelled like rotten candy. It's gum. Check the expiration date, Dream ordered. The wrapper had a barely visible blob of ink that represented the expiration date. August 22nd, 1971, George read aloud. Can't believe this never attracted ants. George put the candy on the desk and reached for something else he found on the floor. It was a rock. Is this quartz? George asked. Yeah, it's my favorite one I own, she admitted. George held it tightly in his hand. Why give it to me then? Dream lay back on his bed, letting his records play in the background and staring at the wallpaper. Why give it to me then? How was Dream to answer that? He wanted to give it to George because he had wanted his favorite person to have his favorite thing. All of it was so wrong. He cared about someone who didn't even exist yet. He cared about his best friend Satnat too, but not the way he did for George. Someone he had never even met. Dream? George mumbled to the phone. Oh, yeah, guess I just don't think I'll need it in the future, he answered untruthfully. Alright. George suddenly he was scrambling to pick up more items. In the capsule were other things, such as an old music cassette and baseball cards. After a while, George saw a little canister and held it up to his eyes. He then opened it. It was dry, cracking, and expired. Formerly, lime green paint that was now a dark foresty green. What did you open? Dream asked quietly. Green paint. Green paint? George stuck his finger in what he saw surprised him. His finger broke into a hard cracked layer and into a watery preserved lime paint that he was sure was the original color. I'm sure it's ugly now, right? Dream joked. George looked at his finger covered in paint. No, it's perfect. George had an idea. He spilled a good portion of a can onto his hand and spread it around with the finger. Are you there? What are you doing? Dream asked, but George walked over to his bedroom wall. He glanced at Dream's handprint and for one moment placed his paint-covered hand right next to it. The different sizes of their hands was interesting, along with the detail that Dream's handprint was old and cracking, while George's was clean, fresh, and a bright color. George grabbed the phone with his clean hand. Yeah, I'm here. What'd you do? George stared at the two handprints. Nothing, he mumbled. Oh, Dream remembered. Well, there's one more thing in there, taped to the inside of the capsule. You can look at it, but I'll have to hang up. Why? George asked. Bye, George. Have a good night. Dream bid, and before George could ask for an explanation once again, the connection cut. George put the phone down with a sigh and checked the inside of a capsule container. Inside was a piece of paper. Polaroid. It was of Dream, seemingly candid, taken by another person. He was smiling, with beautiful, dirty blonde hair and a tall It was of Dream, seemingly candid, taken by another person. He was smiling, with beautiful, dirty blonde hair and tall posture. He was holding a pet cat and was in the very bedroom George was in at the moment. George thought he was quite handsome. He was getting sleepy, and his eyes felt closed with a photo held close to him. Part 6. George was sitting at his computer, finishing up work as he had been too caught up talking to Dream to remember doing so. Every time he opened his computer, he always had to resist the urge to search Google endlessly for Dream. His promise not too good looking for him was more important than his curiosity. He was rushing his project, waiting for a phone to ring. This had become a daily thing, procrastinating the laying in his bed with the phone next to him, waiting for a call from a boy he's never met in person. The magic and impossibility of the whole thing had passed. His interest in Dream and his life had made him forget how absurd the whole thing had sounded. It made him forget how far away in time Dream was. Maybe it was the fact that he had been lonely. His family had been back in England, and he had lived alone for the past 6 years, only having 1 or 2 friends who he had not even talked to in months each. Sometimes when you are lonely, you cling to the one person who makes you feel like you have everybody in the world. For George, that was Dream. Dream asked him things that no one had ever bothered to ask. From simple things such as how his day was, to unique questions such as what he would take with him. He had 60 seconds to gather things into a bomb shelter. He didn't know the last time someone had ever been that interested in him and what he had to say. He couldn't remember when he last heard himself talk about things that he actually liked to talk about. So, yes, despite the time difference, no kidding, there was a connection there that mattered to him. The first connection he had had in a while. As he submits his day work of coding, he absentmindedly walked over to a wall. He didn't know how many times he had looked at it day from day. From the high in the corner room to the 2 handprints made of the same paint, different times. Knowing there was something to prove the boy that he was talking to existed, made him feel calm, and his world felt like crumbling. The photo of Dream lay on his desk, his smile permanently captured onto a piece of film that had survived 50 years on the return, furthermore representing the fact that Dream was real. So he clutched the phone in his hand, still vaguely stained with pain, waiting for a call. He did not see it as wasting time. He saw it as an opportunity to finally speak to someone who cares about him. Just on time, the phone started ringing, and he picked up the photo. So he saw the photo. Dream had wasted no time in asking. George glanced to the corner room on the desk it lay on. Yes, I did. That's you, right? Yeah. Dream sighed and seemingly slumped down into a chair. My friend Sap took it. The cat is my cat, Patches. When you called this phone, it's because you thought it was Sap, right? George questioned curiously. Yeah, this is his number, Dream answered. He doesn't know I talked to you, though. He'd see me as crazy. George chuckled. You are already crazy. Thank you. Dream gave short laughs. So I thought about the science of it all. He said as he had gathered himself. George raised his eyebrow. The science? Is this even science? This is straight sci-fi magic, George said, half jokingly. Oh yes, but if all of our experiments with time capsule thing worked out, it means that you do exist in your so-called timeline, and I'm somewhere out there in your world existing as a poor old man. Dream. Go on. George was intrigued. That shouldn't mean that before our first phone call, I never knew you existed. But after we started talking, I think we started modifying the memories of the dream in your time and adding in events that we create. So, George began, why hasn't old you ever visited me yet? Like I said, I could be dead or gotten Alzheimer's or just refused to see you for some reason I do not know yet, James suggested. Why don't you let me look you up on the internet then? George asked. Dream knew about the internet as George had spent hours trying to explain the concept of it to him. James struggled. I don't know. I guess I like the idea that we're talking as if this whole 50-year gap doesn't exist. It's weird to think that now I'm an old man in your time and that we're so far apart from each other. You finding out about me just proves that this friendship will never be a normal one. Dream had done his best to explain. I understand and feel the same way, George said quietly. Thank you. Also for keeping your promise. Of course, anytime, George smiled and looked at the clock. I should sleep, it's late and I have a meeting with some colleagues early in the morning tomorrow. Have fun with that, Dream chuckled. Good night, rung over. Good night, old man, George joked. I'm not even old yet. Yeah. Sleep well, Dream, George finished. Part 7. It had been a week. At that moment, Dream had been on the phone with George, talking about their favorite things in certain categories. George mumbled. Favorite animal? Dream got up and walked over to the small pet bed on the floor and picked up his cats. Say hi, Patches. He put the phone up to Patches' nose, but obviously she was in no mood to say hi to anyone. She's moody. George smiled. Did you wake her up forcefully? Dream put Patches back on her bed. No comment. George shook his head with a laugh. I like cats too, he told him. I used to have one. Cat people are the best, Dream said, and George hummed in agreement. What haven't we asked? George wondered out loud after a few minutes of silence. Dream was looking outside his window when he saw a man pull up in his neighbor's driveway. His neighbor came out and she smiled at the man, who presented her with brightest and fullest of red roses. She happily took them from him and gave him a hug. He then picked her up and spun her. Dream immediately assumed these were people who had not seen each other for a while, meeting for the first time again. These kinds of moments made Dream slightly jealous. He never had a serious romantic connection other than the occasional one-time date that usually ended in disaster. He would have loved to be the one to bring someone flowers. Dream, you're quiet, but I feel like I can hear your thoughts, George said after a while, snapping Dream out of his head. Sorry, Dream apologized, but I thought of a question. George hummed. Alright, what is it? What's your favorite flower? Dream could not handle watching the happy couple anymore, so he shut his blind and covered his windows with white curtains. I don't know much about flowers, George began, but I do admire orchids and orchidillas. Dream knew exactly what those flowers were, as he had helped his mother in her flower shop for years. He knew his flowers and he knew how to take care of them, but he loved them very much. He thought about George's answer. Any particular reason? Well, orchids were my mother's wedding flower. They were everywhere, apparently, Jane explained. As for calendula's, they're just quite beautiful. Cool. Now I know what flowers to send you, Dream half joked. How would that work? George was genuinely curious. I've given you items before, Dream suggested. Flowers from 1970 couldn't survive 50 years in a time capsule, Dream. Dream sighed. Oh, I know that. He sat down against the wall. I'll figure it out. Dream would be in his near 70s if he was still alive during George's time. That fact physically hurt him to think about. But he still brainstormed ways to get flowers to 2020. Then he came up with an idea. George, I have to go get some stuff from the store, but I'll call you again tonight. There was a small shuffle from George's end before he responded with a talk to you later, and they both hung up. Dream drove his car to the nearest flower shop. It was near his house and was squished between a nightclub and a bookstore. He walked in and the smell of fresh flowers overwhelmed him, but felt clean and new. The door also rang a few bells when he opened it, which he found cool. Welcome, the man running the store greeted him, wearing an apron and tending to some plants hanging from his ceiling. Need anything specific, sir? Dream walked over to him. Yes, actually. Do you sell seeds by any chance? The man stepped down from his staircase ladder and gave him a goofy smile. As a matter of fact, we do. Follow me. Dream followed the young man over to the back where seeds and other various gardening supplies were kept. They're organized alphabetically in these little drawers, the shopkeeper explained. I'll be tending to those plants outside, but if you need any help finding something in particular reason, just give a shout or come find me. He grinned again before walking back to where he was working earlier. Dream laughed and shook his head as he walked away, amused by the young man's energy. Then he walked to the drawers and looked for orchid seeds, but could not find any. Dream was too shy to call the man over so quickly after he had just walked away. So in the meantime, he went over to find calendula seeds. To his luck, he opened the drawer and found one last packet of calendula seeds. He took them and walked over to where the shopkeeper was. Excuse me, Dream looked up because the man was high up on the ladder, snipping little leaves off plants. The man looked down. Oh, hello. Find what you need? Dream nodded. Yes, but do you keep orchid seeds by any chance? The man frowned. No, actually, they take years to grow properly from a seed, and we just can't get our hands on them to stock. Dream gestured his understanding. That's all right. He smiled. I'll just be taking these then. He shook the seeds to show him. Calendias, pot marigolds, very pretty when they grow. He stepped down from his staircase ladder once again and led him to the counter. Yes, Dream agreed. The person I'm getting them for thinks so too. Oh, so you got a girl that loves to garden then? Dream chuckled a bit at the answer question. It's a bit complicated. It always is, the shopkeeper agreed. My little lady hates flowers, so it's complicated for me too. Who could hate flowers? Her, apparently, since she's allergic. He grinned nonchalantly before handing Dream the seed packet and taking money. Dream smiled back. Well, thank you. He squinted up a name tag on the man's apron. Thank you, Carl. You're welcome, sir. He waved goodbye happily before going back to taking care of his plants. Dream came home and packed the seeds into a time capsule and burying it in the usual spot he'd put it in. Then he called George, notifying him that he indeed had figured out a way to get him flowers from 1970. Part 8. George held a 50-year-old seed packet in one hand and the phone in another. Dream, I've got no idea how to grow flowers, and don't have any supplies. You don't need to grow them. You can keep the seeds and say they're flowers because technically they are. Dream shook his head. No, you went through trouble. The least I could do is grow them. Plus, I need a new hobby again anyway. And gardening seems like a fun thing to try. I left a little list of things you need and some tips in the container. Dream reminding him. reminded him, and George picked up a time capsule, and indeed, there was a small paper chicken scratch like handwriting. Nice handwriting. Oh, shush, Drew chuckled. I was never one for good penmanship. George read over the paper. If you don't mind, I'll be off to get these supplies before it gets dark. Dream sighed in defeat. He felt a little selfish for always wanting to be the person George spent his time with, but understood he had life. All right, he said. Can I call you later? I'm not sure, but definitely try, George said as he put on a jacket and grabbed his car keys. Bye for now, then, George, Dream said over the phone. Bye, Dream, George responded before putting the phone down and walking out of his house into his car. He sat on the driver's seat and put his cell phone on his phone holder. Hey, Siri? The phone beeped. Directions to the nearest gardening store. The phone took a moment before it spoke. All right, I found gardening stores near you. The first one was only 0.5 miles away, which was awfully close. So he chose it, then pulled out of his driveway. George got to the gardening store, which was a bit run down from the outside, but when he walked in, it was a very clean and nice and beautiful place. He looked around, unsure where to begin to look. An old man who was watering a row of soil turned to him. Why, hello, he smiled happily. Anything I can do for you, sir? George made take off a piece of paper with Dream's list of supplies, but then he realized he left at home. You alright, sir? Do you know how to help me get what I need to grow a certain type of flower? George asked politely. Do I? The old man put his fist on his hips like a superhero. And George was surprised at how he could still be so energetic even at his old age. Why, I'm probably the best in town to help you with that, young lad. What are you growing? Calendias. George showed him the seed packet. One man looked at the brand and label closely. Why, this here is one of our seed packets. We haven't had these flowers in stock since the good old 70. How'd you get these in your hands? George stretched the back of his neck. I found them in an old drawer. The man looked at him skeptically. Well, I can go get what you need myself, and you can wait here. Look around and be like... George raised his eyebrows. Oh, I can help you if you like, he offered, but the shopkeeper shook his head fiercely. No. I haven't helped a customer like you in months. Maybe years. Let me feel like I'm doing my job again, he assured. George became sad at how the man's business was seemingly slow and dry, and agreed to letting the man give his supplies for him. After a surprisingly fast few minutes, the man came back with a garden of basic supplies he needed to grow flowers. George followed him over to the counter. Thank you. No problem. So why the interest in getting gardening? The young man asked while placing his item in a tote. George thought about it for a while. Just wanted to see if these old flowers would have any hope in growing. You'll need a lot of patience if you want to even see a leaf come out of the door of flowers from 1970 something. He told George before telling him the total price of his items, which was cheap. George took out a $100 bill. Keep the change, he smiled. The man's eyes widened. Why, thank you. You're lucky to be able to grow flowers at home. I can. Why's that? George asked as he took out his tote of items. My wife hates most flowers, he answered plainly. Hates them? Who can hate flowers, though? George wondered aloud. The man smiled. Her, since she's allergic. George was taken aback. A flower store owner whose wife is allergic to flowers. Wow, that must be complicated then. It only says, the man said with a big smile. But we've lasted over 50 years, I guess, so it hasn't been that complicated, he assured happily. Then he suddenly shivered. You alright, sir? George asked. Oh, why, yes, he smiled beautifully. I just got a weird sense of deja vu. Anyway, my name is Carl, and if you need anything else, you're welcome whenever you'd like. George chuckled. I'll be sure to turn to you, Carl. Thank you. George got home and placed his stuff on his bedroom floor. He looked through the items and grabbed a piece of paper with Dream's instructions he had left on the desk. The phone then rang and George rushed to answer it. Hello, Dream. I just got the supplies. That's good. When you start growing flower? Will you start growing flowers soon? He asked. George organized his new items. I should be. I'm not busy anytime soon. Good. Dream audibly smiled. It was a funny story. I'm with the cheeriest old man I could ever meet. Was it me? Dream joked. George rolled his eyes. No, it was a man who owned a flower shop. Bummer it wasn't me, he said, heartily. Anyway, why was he funny? George sat down on the edge of his bed, taking his jacket off. He owns a flower shop, but his wife's allergic to flowers. There's silence on the phone. Dream? No way, he shouted suddenly. What is it? Was his name Carl? Dream asked excitedly. George's eyes widened. Yeah. Hey, you know him? He's who I bought the seeds from, George. He laughed. That means we've been officially connected through one person. That makes sense. He said he hasn't sold Calendia seeds since 1970. Oh, goodness, this is so weird. George shook his head. Weird? It's absolutely awesome. Awesome. Dream exclaimed. Also, it's great and surprising. He saw a lady allergic to flowers. George thought for a second. Wait, so he thought some more. Isn't it interesting about how we both talked to Carl just these last two dates, but in reality, us meeting him is 50 years apart. James sighed when he heard 50 years apart. But he hummed in agreement. Anyways, I'll get on to sleep so I can spend the morning trying to grow these flowers. James smiled. Alright then, good night, wrong number. Sleep well, old man, who's technically not old yet. Dream smiled before hanging up the phone and laying in his bed, staring at the ceiling until he eventually drifted off to sleep. Part 9. Part 9. George was thankful for living in 2020. The age of the internet, where if you had no idea how to do something, with one click of a button, you could after 10 minutes. Though George had this advantage, he himself was a problem. He had watched different tutorials, but was still confused. It was visible to the cars passing by. It must have looked absolutely stupid. He groaned and put his hand through his hair. Painting flowers could not possibly be that hard. Does Carl do this? George whispered aggressively to himself before crumbling onto the hard dirt. The man who had watched him dig out the time capsule was once again writing furiously in his pocketbook before spotting George and walking towards him. George started to panic. Why was this stranger walking towards him? Who was he? He did not have time to think before a stranger appeared in front of him and pulled down his hoodie to reveal a young man in a beanie and circular golden-rimmed glasses. You look like you're struggling. May I help? George watched him suspiciously, wondering why a passerby would help someone like him with such seemingly easy talk, like pain. George watched him suspiciously, wondering why a passerby would help someone like him with just seemingly easy talk like planting flowers. I just don't know how to do this. The man knelt down in front of a plant pot. I'm Wilbur said. I live a couple houses down there with my youngest son. George was a bit more relieved when he learned a man with a flower. George Davidson. They shook hands. How old is your son? Wilbur gestured over to a line of trees and a boy surrounding sword fighting. The blonde one's mine. He's 6. George watched the two boys play. You took my video games disc and broke it. That was so important to me, one of them said as he slashed his foam sword towards his smaller brunette friend. His poor friend cowered slightly but swung his sword nonetheless. It's just a disc, Tommy, he said in a high-pitched voice, but Tommy was not giving in. He kept going at it, which was which highly amused George. Tommy! One with a soft voice called him. Play nice, please. She seemed to be used to yelling at him for that reason. But he took my... Tommy began to sputter, but was interrupted immediately. It's a disc, Tommy, the woman told him. We can easily get another one. Tommy shook his head angrily. It wouldn't be the same, he complained, but his brunette friend rolled his eyes before dodging another sword hit. They seem close, George told Wilbur. Wilbur nodded with a smile. Practically you've been friends since birth. Wilbur seemed experienced with planting flowers and was expertly burying the seed and watering as if he had done so many times in the past. Thank you, George sent a small smile to Wilbur. I assume it's not that hard, and I'm extremely tense. No problem. Wilbur began, but his son ran toward him suddenly, tears in his eyes. Daddy, he's here again, with a boy's sob, collapsing into his father's arms. Who's here, Tommy? Wilbur comforted the younger boy. Uncle! Tommy cried into Wilbur's chest before pointing to his far left. Wilbur looked at George apologetically. He's afraid of his uncle. George was about to ask why when suddenly a man with a tall posture, boots, and hair of pink highlight shouted, Where is Theseus? Where is Theseus? George understood why Tommy found him intimidating. It was terrifying, and his voice boomed across the neighborhood. I heard a little someone is fighting people for a disc. If that's here, come and fight me to the death. The uncle shouted before spotting Tommy. Was it you? No, Tommy whimpered, but Techno moved closer, not believing his lie. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, Uncle Tubbo. Techno. Wilbur looked at the blonde woman. Did you call him Sally? Sally gave an apologetic look. He was being mean to Tubbo, and this was the only way he saw him. Uncle Techno grabbed the sword from Tubbo and marched toward Tommy. I'll show you what fighting for possessions looks like. Tommy ran past Techno. He attempted to guide him, but he's too slippery. He made a beeline for Tubbo. I'm sorry, Tubbo. Is Tubbo's real name? George asked Wilbur. No, Wilbur explained. It's a nickname everyone calls a kid. George nodded in understanding and looked over to two kids playing. Tubbo smiled. It's alright, Tommy, he said before giving his friend a hug. All was well. That was easier than I thought. Techno shrugged as he watched the boys embrace. Bummer, I thought I actually get to fight a child. He threw the sword down before walking away. George laughed during the whole situation. They seemed like such a happy family. A sting of jealousy filled up inside him. From seeing Tommy play with his friend to Wilbur and Sally's hilarious parenting style, he wished he had grown up like that. Well, I should go, Wilbur told George. My father's coming in tonight for dinner, and he hasn't done that in a while, so it's quite a big deal. George grinned. Nice meeting you and your family, Wilbur. He got up and brushed the dirt off of his jeans. I hope we'll get to talk again. Wilbur yelled for Tommy. So do I. Have a nice day. He walked towards his son, picking him up and urging Tubbo to follow so he could get back home to his family safe and sound. Part 2. Dream called George to check up on him, and took a few rings before he picked up. Hello, Dream. George, he smiled. Sorry I couldn't call yesterday. The kids I coach were having a game and it was quite busy. George was confused until he remembered Dream coached baseball. How was that? Did you win? Dream gave a hearty laugh. In all honesty, it was a really bad loss. He admitted quite young and didn't take it well. One of them threw a soda can at a player from the other team, and it caused some trouble between me and my parents. George imagined Dream tried to explain himself to a parent and guiltily. It amused him. How'd that go? Dream groaned, and they threatened to get me fired, accusing me of being the one to tell the kid to throw a soda can. I was getting riled up when one of the players came up to me and told me that the kid was provoked to throw a soda can because a rival team called him duck-footed and threw peanuts at him. George laughed, opening the microwave and throwing a bag of instant popcorn inside. What did they do to a rival team? Dream sighed. Nothing. They didn't get in trouble at all, but my kid got suspension from games. That's quite unfair. George frowned, leaning against the kitchen counter and playing with fingernails. Dream was out for a while. Yeah, but I'm gonna work with him privately anyway, so he gets practice in and isn't just thrown into the next game when he's back. George smiled. He seemed to really care for kids on the team, which reminded him of his run with Wilbur and his family for the day before. That's sweet of you, Dream. I actually had a hilarious encounter with children as well. Oh, really? Dream said, intrigued. What happened? The microwave beeped, and George put the phone between his cheek and his shoulder as he opened it and made to grab a popcorn inside the bag. Well, I was having trouble planting your flowers, and ow! He burned his fingers and decided it was easier to grab it by pinching the corner of the bag instead. And a man named Wilbur came over to help me. Then I met his family. Wilbur, Dream thought. That's quite a nice name. He wrote down a sticky note before turning his lips to the phone again. What happened with his family? George chuckled off memory. His kid was hilarious. He was fighting his friend over a video game disc, and so Wilbur's wife called his uncle to scare him into apologizing. That's one interesting way to parent, Dream grinned. Did it work? The boy sobbed and practically begged for forgiveness. George laughed before eating some popcorn and collapsing onto the couch. You chew quite loud, Dream told George, and George immediately stopped, amusing Dream even more. George swallowed. I'm sorry, I forgot how loud it would sound over the phone. Dream shook his head. No, it's adorable, he said, sort of impulsively, but truthfully nonetheless. George was taken aback by that. I imagined it being a bit annoying, but thank you anyway, was all he could say. I never asked you about this, George, Dream began. You're obviously British. How'd you end up in Florida? George's first thought was the iconic, if you're from Africa, then why are you white? Line from Mean Girls. But he knew Dream wouldn't give a reference, so he kept it to himself. I got a scholarship from school here, George explained. I took it, and then I got carried away with how much I liked it here. My mom and sister didn't want me to leave, but I did so anyway. I finished school and didn't come back home. I stayed with my school friend Alex, but he ended up moving to Mexico. Luckily, I had a job by then and could pay for this house, and now I'm here. He took in what he just said, realizing at once that his loneliness had one person to blame. Himself. Do you visit home often? Dream asked, his voice full of genuine interest. George sighed. No, you're fine. I send cards for holidays and birthdays, but the last time I saw them was when I had an argument about living here. They never made an effort to invite me back home anyway, so I never tried. You should try, Dream urged. They wanted you to stay home in the first place, so why would they want you there? Why wouldn't they want you there? At least to go visit or check up on them. George had never thought about going home until Dream suggested he do so. He missed his family and grew up in a loving environment. It was him that isolated himself with his own worries for his future and hard work that cost him a childhood full of friends and connections. It was easy for him to get caught up in work. All he did before he met Dream was work. He'd order takeout, then stay in his house putting his corneas with his massive screen time just doing work. Meeting Dream had pulled him out of his mundane routine of not living, but merely surviving. He had a reason to get off his computer. For the first time in a long time, he had someone to talk to. He had gone outside and he realized how long it had been since he had done anything physically draining when he dug a big time capsule. He had driven to a flower store and met someone new. He had gone outside and spent time trying to plant flowers he didn't know how to plant, resulting in making a new friend. Dream was the first domino in him to living life the way he should have been living all of his life. sound like I'm forcing you to go back home. I know nothing about your situation, Dream said after a while. And George felt bad for leaving him in silence while he was busy with his thoughts. George shook his head fastly. No, he assured. I was just thinking. About me? Dream joked. George smiled. His eyes had reached his eyes, which since meeting Dream had started having... The smile had reached his eyes, which since meeting Dream has started to happen more often. Oh, yes, of course, because I just can't stop thinking about you. He responded sarcastically with an eye roll. Honesty is the best policy, Dream said, matter-of-factly. You're such... George couldn't even find words. He just spoke the first one that came to mind. You're such a piece of work. Dream responded with sassy mumbles. And George found so vexing in a good way. George, what do you look like? Dream asked. George knew what Dream looked like, but realized that there was no way to show Dream his appearance. I can describe myself if you like. Yes, Dream agreed. Oh, how about this? You describe yourself and I sketch you on the wall. You watch the sketch and tell me how accurate I am. I love how we normalize ruining the walls. Oh, shut it, Dream countered. So, deal? Alright, Dream, George gave in. I guess I can clean the walls later. Dream celebrated. Just a warning, I'm an amazing artist. George groaned before speaking. I have quite a long face, but I guess it evens itself out. I mean, I think my jawline does its justice. George watched and waited, and then an outline of a face started to appear on his wall. Bit cracked and worn with time, but still distinguishable. I have dark hair. It's straight and cut short at the moment, and sort of bangs, but not too long. He looked at his reflection on his locked cell phone, trying his best to describe himself accurately. He watched the drawing. Oh, a bit longer than that, he instructed, and indeed the sketch of the hair became a bit longer. George expected Dream to do a rushed joke drawing with surprisingly full effort put into it. Tell me about your eyes, Dream said. My eyes. George thought for a moment. They're pretty almond-shaped, and my pupils are quite large, so they look silly when I look to the side. Oh, and they're brown, I believe. Dream started sketching the eyes. They looked a bit bigger than his, but other than that, it looked good. My eyebrows. I wouldn't say they're extremely thick, but they're not extremely thin either. They're a bit lower and closer to my eyes. George continued, and so did the drawing. I've got no idea how to describe my nose, so I guess I'll just say medium. Medium? Dream chuckled. Yeah, George confirmed. The nose could use some work, but it didn't make the drawing look bad. And your lips, George? Dream softly asked almost softly. Describe your lips. They're the last thing. George thought about it for a while. They're full enough that they don't disappear when I grin, was the only way he could explain it. The drawing was complete. So, how is it? George was a bit amazed, to be honest. It's great. If you put me in a line with people and showed a stranger this drawing and asked him to choose which one of us the drawing was of, they'd pick me. Dream sounded proud of himself after that. Wow, so I am a great artist. I was just joking about that. It's not entirely accurate, but that's not on me for not explaining well enough. George critiqued. Maybe the drawing isn't that good, but I did picture you in my imagination. I hope that's more accurate, since I tried to match your face to your voice. Dream told him. You're lucky you have a photo of me. I am, George said quietly. He meant to say it to himself, but obviously that wasn't what happened. Dream laughed. Damn right you are. I'm a pretty thing to look at, aren't I? You get so full of yourself sometimes, George said. But inside he deeply agreed. I get that a lot. Dream admitted proudly. Anyways, I'm gonna turn it in for a night. I have to meet up with my sister to help her with her dumb project. And the drive from to her, my mom's place is quite far, so I'm waking up early. Are you staying there? George asked. Most likely, Dream said. I'm sorry, I probably won't be able to call her today, but I'm sure the day after tomorrow I'm all yours. George smiled. Alright, be safe, Dream. Good night, George. Dream bid him, running his fingers on the wall with a sketch of George's face. Part 11. Usually, when George waited for Dream to call him, he'd occupy himself with his work. He had finished early, though, seeing he had nothing to do, and no call to expect, since Dream was going to go over to his sister's for a while and leaving with fun at home. He sat in silence in his room for a while, but deciding he'd spend time outside. He had not gone on a walk for a while, so he decided it would be best. And also because he knew Dream would get mad at him for not using his free day wisely. He put on a hoodie, pocketed his phone, and trudged downstairs, walking outside onto his porch. He checked for flowers, and as he expected, nothing had grown yet. It was the scary part about growing flowers. In the beginning, you don't know if anything was happening at all yet. He decided he would go to the park. He brought a small notebook and a pencil to sketch his surroundings as he used to do with his mother when he was young. He got inside of a swing set and found a bench close by. He sat down, sighed, and started scratching lines on a notebook. No, Tommy, I told you not to be mean, and you won't listen, George heard a woman say. He turned and saw Scally holding Tommy, who looked grumpy. But I want ice cream like Tubbo. It's not fair, he cried, but his mom wasn't letting up. Sally pointed a finger at him. I told you a million times, don't be mean to girls. What do? You call Kara Puffy until she cried. Tommy's mouth gaped open. She likes to be called that. It's her nickname, Mom. Fine then, Sally said. Sally said. If that didn't make her cry, what did? Tommy put his head down in defeat. He chased her around with a stick, and I told her if I got close enough, I'd poke her. Sally groaned. Tommy, you can't go around doing that. She deserves, Sally finished. Yes, that word, Tommy pleaded. Why does she deserve it? Sally tried to understand her son. Tommy waved his hands. She's a girl. Sally sighed and turned away. She caught sight of George on a bench and waved. Oh, hello. You talked to my husband the other day, I believe. George nodded. Over, yes. He smiled at her and then gestured toward Tommy, who had his arms crossed and flared up his nose when he looked at him. So that little man is being trouble, I see. Everyone was walking with Tubbo towards them now. Tubbo looked at Tommy. Here, Tommy, we can split. Tommy was trying to pretend mad, but eventually gave in, as Tubbo gave him some of his ice cream. Wilbur's eyes glanced at Sally and George talking. George, he exclaimed. Pleasure to see you here. Hello, Wilbur, he greeted. How was the meetup of your father? Wilbur thought for a second. Quite odd. He constantly refused to come here, but suddenly we get a call saying he's on a flight to Florida and to get the guest room ready. George chuckled. Dinner go well, though? Wilbur nodded. I'd say so. Tommy was a bit shy and weary of him first, but he warmed up to him when he protected Tommy from Uncle Tuckno. George smiled. Seemed like a good time. Wilbur shook his head with a grin. We don't even have a guest room. He rolled his eyes. He took Sally and I's room and made us sleep with Tommy. Sounds like a very old person's thing to do, George told him, and they both shared a laugh. Wilbur watched George closely, almost as if he was waiting for a certain reaction, but found nothing there. Oh, Wilbur saw George's book and pencil. May I borrow your pencil for a moment? George nodded and handed him a pencil. Wilbur took out his pocket notebook and scratched a few lines before returning it. Thank you. George took the pencil. No problem. What brings you to Doom Park? Wilbur turned to Sally, and then back to George and whispered, in all honesty, it's to escape my father. He's that bad? George said. Not necessarily, Wilbur explained. He lives in England, obviously. Obviously, I'm a Brit and I was born there, but he wasn't. Anyway, that's too long of a story. Basically, he's moody because he is old. Because he's old and because of jet lag. I've actually thought about how funny it is that us Brits ended up in a neighborhood a couple houses down from each other in Florida. George joke. Wilbur nodded. Yeah, well, he ate a spoon of ice cream. Dad bought us a house here in Florida. Said Florida was fun. I mean, who could say no to a house? George was giving what Wilbur said some thought were suddenly out of nowhere. Wilbur was giving what Wilbur said some. George was giving that what Wilbur said some thought when suddenly out of nowhere, Techno was walking towards them, pulling his hair. You come here to escape him too, Techno? Wilbur grinned. Techno rolled his eyes. He keeps wanting me to fight him, he complained. An old man wanting to fight me. Wilbur turned to George. Dad and his old friends used to come over and teach us how to fight. We'd fence, kickbox, you name it. George let out a breath of laughter. Sounds like wife man. That he is, Techno said plainly as he picked up an ice cream cup from the table. Oh, Techno, Sally said. And Techno turned toward her. That's Tubbo's ice cream. If he left it there to go play with Tommy. So I'm stealing from a child, Techno questioned. That makes it so much better. George thought he was actually going to steal the ice cream, but he put it down and sat on the table part of a bench. So, Techno, you're American, but I presume you and Wilbur are brothers? George asked. Techno nodded. Got used to this country, I guess. That's an impressive American accent, George complimented. Yeah, well, I do, because it sounds better than my British one, Techno admitted with a shrug. Sally, are you sure Tubbo doesn't want this ice cream? Let it alone, Techno, Sally scolded, and Techno sighed in defeat. He couldn't win against her. There was vibration coming from a bench. George checked his phone, but it wasn't his. It's not mine. That's ringing. I reckon it's yours. George checked his back pocket, and indeed, his phone was ringing. Oh, it's Dad. Techno glanced over. What does the old man want this time? He said plainly. Wilbur answered, and George could hear faint mumbling. Wilbur said. Yes, I have, Dad. No, that's tomorrow, not today. How do I know? Dad, you were the one that wrote that day down. How do you not know? Alright, that's fine. Bye, Dad. Techno raised his eyebrows. He was just checking on where we went. I said it was a mistake leaving him alone at the house. I don't know, what did he do to the house? Sally said. We'll have to see. Wilbur sighed. We're going to head home. We're going to head home now, George. I'm a bit scared as to what he's done to the house. But maybe if we get there early enough, we can prevent more damage. George laughed. Alright then. It's getting late. I should probably head home as well. Wilbur smiled. Sounds good. Have a nice evening, George. You and your family as well. George waved them goodbye. Part 12. George woke up the next morning to the sunlight shining through his curtain. It was almost the end of August, but the weather seemed to have been colder than usual in contrast to the bright sunlight. He planned to stay in his room for a bit in case Dream called, but after a while he got hungry and walked outside to make himself some toast and a buttered tea. He then went back to his room to eat there. The phone rang as he walked through the door. He shuffled quickly, putting down the mug of tea and toast on his work desk to answer the phone. George, Dream greeted. I just got home. How are you? George took a bite of his toast. Fine. I went to the park yesterday, and that was pretty fun. With Wilbur and his family again, and his brother called Techno. Techno, Dream repeated. I have a close friend nicknamed Techno. George drank some of his tea. It's a cool coincidence, but I don't know if your techno is outlandish as techno here. Dream laughed. Oh, yes, he is. He said, Not lately, though. Not lately, though. He's had cancer for a while, but he's fighting. George frowned. I'm sorry, I'm sure he'll do okay. I am too, Dream smiled. Anyway, I interrupted a bit there. How was the park? George thought for a moment. Well, I didn't say for long, but I do think they're a bunch of fun people I'd consider friends. Dream smiled. I'm glad you're making friends. I know you said you hardly have any. Well, you're my friend, George reminded him. Dream was silent. Well, I mean a friend from your time, George sighed. You're right. I didn't mean it like that, Dream softened. You're one of my most important friends, and the only other friend I feel connection with other than Sapnap. You said you went to the park yesterday? Dream asked after a while to avoid any tension. Yeah? The 29th, Dream asked to make sure. Yes, George replied. Why do you ask? Dream was silent. I don't know, just to make sure that the areas we are in are the same month and day. Yeah, but George let out a breath of a laugh. We're a bit off on the year. Dream shook his head with a smile. A bit. George heard scribbling from Dream's on the phone. Are you drawing? Dream hesitated. No, I'm writing. What are you writing? George asked, intrigued. Just some stuff, was all Dream could say. And George hummed in response. So, how was helping your sister? George wanted to hear all about Dream's day, especially since they didn't get to talk about the night before. It was pretty fun, he admitted. She gets quite annoying, but she's like a mini-me, so I can't blame her. Wow, the girl George pondered. Scary. She can be scary, Dream said gleefully. She was going to punch me in the face for holding her diary and asking what it was. She does karate, too. Well then, you shouldn't touch diaries, George said sassily. Dream went quiet. I missed you. It was only a day, but I missed talking to you, if that doesn't sound weird. George's eyes widened a bit, unsure how to respond. He thought it'd be best to be honest. I missed you too. Yeah, well, me being gone got you out of the house, right? Dream brought up with a smile. He noticed how much more open George was to be less isolated. He noticed how much more open George was to be less isolated lately. He knew how much he was committed to work more than simple things in life, so it was a nice change. George leaned against the wall, finishing his last piece of toast. Yeah, I haven't done that in a while. Are you saying I should disappear more often? Dream joked in a trying voice. No, George answered loudly, and cleared his throat. I just mean it's good to get a bit of sunlight every few days, and I only went outside because I didn't have any more work to do. You just want me gone? Dream was pushing jokingly. I'm an old man anyway. I can do it. What can I do for your life? Stop joking, George said seriously. You've done so much for my life. More in 1 month than most people have done in years. Dream was taken aback by the serious and heartfelt response to his stupid joke. So have you, George? You don't even know. Part 13. George had his eyes closed, headphones on, laying on his bed. He was listening to Flightless Bird, American Mouth by Iron and Wine. And though he normally listened to songs of completely different genre than this, he continued to put the song on repeat. He felt emotions he had never felt before. Be suddenly reeled by the careful construction of melodious sounds, For a boy whose life was run by focus and set goals, he had not been used to being so driven off course by turns of events he could not explain. He did believe there was a science to everything. He knew that if he tried hard enough, everything he had ever known could be solved with numbers and quiet genius. He had been a firm believer in the construct of everything he knew as a new being just another number. Life was data. Everything he had ever committed himself to had been data. His job, daily routines, his whole life were just another algorithm he knew was solvable on paper and pen. So why had a phone call suddenly thrown all of his beliefs down a waterfall of madness? He could have just been clinging to one person in his life and had never given a damn about him. But he felt something more. A misfit possibility in outlandish circumstances was an emotion that formed simply by exchanging words on a device connected by a ribbon with timeline. He wasn't going to run to a scientist to get an explanation or boast about the miracle that was this odd telephone and show the world that he had discovered some sort of magic. It was almost like he had wanted a dream to himself. That this blonde that was strictly made for them, and that the world wasn't meant to know. Dream's voice threw his logic down the drain, along with all his crap about scientific proof and algorithmic nonsense. He had been the magnet pull that he needed to realize how much he had messed up his life, his relationships, and every decision he had ever made, all to help himself. So he lay there, wondering why the one entity in his life that seemed to fix him was someone he couldn't have. What he wanted dream as, he wasn't sure. He had never had a friendship in which he found it safe to spill his inner demons in exchange for words of comfort and honest criticism. George and Dream had made a schedule in which Dream would call every 8 p.m. every night, and even earlier on weekends. George glanced at the clock, squinting to see he thankfully had 2 more long minutes to wait before he'd hear the saving grace that was the phone ringing. 3 minutes had gone by, and though George knew that not every call was going to be on the dot, he felt a little lonely worried. 10 minutes went on, then 30, an hour and a half. He heard a knock on the door just as he was about to give up waiting and make dinner. He placed his small figure on the telephone, so if it rang, the phone would shake, the figure would fall. If George came back and the figure was on the floor, he'd know Dream had called while he was gone. He forced himself downstairs quickly, not wanting to miss the call in case no one ever came. He opened the door to see Wilbur with his usual pocket notebook in hand and Sally holding a bottle of apple cider. "Wilbur, Sally," George greeted. "What brings you here at 8 p.m?" He gestured to their presence and the bottle of cider. George wrote in his notebook, and Wilbur wrote in his notebook and stuffed it into his pocket. Well, it's been a while since we had friends to chat with and drink with, so we figured to knock on the door to our fellow Brit to see if he's available. George hesitated a bit, a little weary of leaving the phone in the event of Dream calling. Wilbur and his family had been so kind and hard to say no to, and love to. "That's lovely," Sally smiled before the couple were gestured inside. "I adore your house. It has such a vintage feel." George looked around. If only she knew it. It is sort of vintage. Nothing changed in this place. It is sort of vintage. Nothing's changed in this place since the 60s or 70s, I assume. Wilbur nodded. So, he was looking around before spotting a painting. "Birth of Venus," he said. "I didn't know you were a fan of art." "That isn't something I bought," June corrected. "It came with the house, actually. But it's quite cool that you know the name of it." Wilbur turned toward him. We used to have one in our old family house. My parents admire the artist. They had sat down on the couch, and George had played a movie for them to watch. So who's taking care of little Tommy? George asked. My father and Techno initially, but Techno wanted to come here with us. Wilbur explained. He's welcome here if you'd like, George suggested. You can give him a call and invite him. The more the merrier. George felt like he was getting carried away. He had liked the idea of having friends, even though his worries about the lack of a phone call from Dream for the night had subsided. Sally opened the cider and pulled coasters and glasses out of the purse that she had brought herself. Are you sure? I hope we didn't interrupt you in anything. George shook his head. No worries, he assured her. My plans got cancelled for one night, so this is actually a good substitute. Wilbur tilted his head. What were your plans initially? He questioned, accepting a glass of cider from Sally and taking a sip, being sure to put a coaster on his chin so he didn't spill anything in George's house. George scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I was going to talk to an old friend, but he turned out to have last-minute plans. He tried his best to be truthful, but not entirely. Wilbur nodded slowly. He took another sip of cider and started clicking his pen frantically, patting his jackets for something. Dear, Sally touched his shoulder. I saw you put it in your jeans pocket. Wilbur checked his jean pocket and pulled out his notebook. Whew, I thought I had lost it. George finally had the courage to ask, what's in that notebook? You don't have to tell me. I just see you with it all the time. Wilbur seemed to think about his answer for a second. It's a planner. I think that's the best way to describe it. Jordan understood. That makes sense. Sorry if that was an intrusive question. No. Wilbur waved his hands. I'd be curious as well. I never let it out of my sight. Wilbur had seemed like a simple man, a father with a stable family and a seemingly good job. But deeper inside was a mysterious man that he felt hid something deeper. Everyone had that, of course, but Wilbur seemed to harness that energy the most out of everyone George knew. Then again, he didn't know many people. There was a knock on the door. That must be Techno, Wilbur assumed, and George made his way to the door to open it. Techno stood there with a trench coat and his usual boots and rings. He really was an intimidating person, and if you were Tommy, he'd be scared of him as well. He walked in. Well, Tommy's asleep. He fell asleep to Dad telling the story of adventures. Remember those? Wilbur looked reminiscently. Yeah, we'd beg him for more stories, and he'd tell us. He wouldn't continue if we didn't sleep, and then the next night he'd have the next part. Alright, but some of them obviously weren't true, Techno said as he sat down. Hello, by the way, George. What's up, Techno? George greeted, watching as Techno waved to Sally. Wilbur scoffed. Of course they were all true. He's not that very good of an actor or liar, but with the way he told the stories, I knew he lived through them. Techno rolled his eyes. Wilbur, you believe those stories and you're an adult man? He shook his head, visibly disappointed. I knew those were fiction when I was 6. Wilbur looked to George. He's just a big non-believer, he whispered. I heard that Harry Potter, he scolded. Wilbur laughed, and Sally and the rest of them laughed, while Wilbur gave him a death stare and pushed his glasses up his face. What kind of stories were they? George asked, not specifically to one of the two brothers, but to whoever would answer. Techno held his hands up, counting his fingers. There was one jumping a fence at the city goo and petting the leopard. One of him wrestling a gator he found in the sewers. However, you couldn't possibly believe one about him and him. Wilbur stopped suddenly. All right, stopped awkwardly. Techno, we get it. I'm serious. Techno put his hands up. Just saying, it's absurd how you can be 36 and believe that story is true. Even Tommy, could go to Dad's face and tell him it's fake. And he's 6. George didn't want to ask too many questions, so he didn't ask about what the story was. Instead, he tried to break the tension between the two brothers. So Tommy's getting pretty close with him now, isn't he? Wilbur nodded while giving a thumbs up. Tommy loves him, he answered. Then suddenly, he remembered something. Oh, Techno, imagine if he met Dad's best friend. They would have gotten along so well. And Techno looked down, an unfamiliar look of sadness on his face as he turned to George. That friend our dad used to teach us to fight with? He passed away a couple months ago. Dad called us, absolutely devastated. They were really close. Tommy would have loved to think bigger of him. George took everything in. They seemed to have grown up so happily around friends and family that made life fun enough to have stories to share around. George's fear was that they'd ask about his childhood, and he had nothing to respond with. They had finished the movie, sharing a few more stories before Wilbur thought it would be a good idea for them all to go home. It was a good night, George. Thank you all for having us over when we basically came to your house uninvited. Oh no, please don't start with that. George smiled. It was nice to have some company after a while. Anytime, Wilbur grinned, before writing on a piece of his notebook and ripping it out. Here's our phone number. If you ever do all hang out again, just give us a call and we'll be here. Techno walked towards George, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. Stay safe, cool brother. He patted him on the shoulder before walking out. Sally had kindly taken to cleaning up all the glasses and coasters, which didn't even make much of a mess thanks to her, and bid George goodbye. When George shut the door, he ran upstairs and checked the phone, but still a small toy sitting on top of the phone was still perfectly balanced atop it. It had been nearly midnight, and thought it was best to go to sleep and hope Dream would call the next day. The absence of a distraction in the form of Wilbur and his family opened his mind to the endless thoughts he had been thinking earlier. He had once played Flightless Bird American. He had once again played Flightless Bird American Elf on his headphones and fell asleep, occupied only with what ifs and imagines in his full head. Part 14. It was 7:58 p.m. and the phone was ringing. George had awoken from his nap that had usually gone a bit longer than he initially planned, and ran to pick up. Dream! He explained, a little too enthusiastic than he normally agreed. He had almost knocked the phone over because he had tugged on the cord a little too much. There was a small scuffling before Dream responded. Hello, George, he sat down. I'm sorry I didn't call yesterday, or if you got worried. Zapnat just went through this horrible breakup with his girlfriend of 2 years. Now I was over at his place trying to soothe his troubles. George had never known what it was like to have his heart broken, mostly because he had never had someone to break it. He fidgeted with the phone cord and pulled a small table with the phone closer to him. How is he holding up? He asked. I know romantic pain can have quite lasting effects. James sniggered a little, which confused George as to what he found funny. Quite lasting effects. Dream mimicked in a horrible impression of the British accent. I like that. Anyway, he's not in the best place right now, but he's a tough guy. He'll get out of it. Soon. The girl is being a jerk anyway. George had seen his old roommate Alex go through a breakup once before. He had been a rightful mess and hadn't eaten or slept well for weeks. He saw the cost of love, and if it didn't work out, it could change people, even the strongest of happiest people. Of course, George didn't get why it affected him so badly, or why it was something worth crying over. Alex had pulled the beanie off of his head and collapsed on the gray, tattered sofa. He threw the beanie across the room and dug his hands forcefully into his hair. She made me promise, you know? She made so many promises, and I was one who was weary of them. But you know what? I promised anyway. He turned to look at George. His eyes were like lasers on his crumbling friend. She made me promise, and now she goes ahead and breaks the one and she becomes the one to break. Why make promises you can't keep? It's bull. George was a bit scared to approach him in such a fragile state, but he picked his cat Luca off the sofa and onto the floor and sat down next to Alex. He tried to begin. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how you can be so angry at her for that, but still love her at the same time. I'd expect you to be more cautious of feeling anything for her. You don't understand, George. Alex sniffled and made to wipe his nose with his jacket, but George quickly leaned over to grab a tissue from a box in the center of a table in front of them. Thank you, he said as he took the tissue from George. Being mad at someone you love is almost always never enough for you to stop loving them. You can't spend so much of your time building a home for someone in all your heart just to evict them in 10 seconds. George nodded, but still couldn't bring himself to understand. If I were you, I'd have to just forget about her. That doesn't happen right away, Alex explained. It takes time, trust me, George. One day you'll realize how much of a villain time can be. What do you mean? You can only go so long without having been hurt by love. When you're older and you experience it all for the first time, you get hurt more. You're not used to it. You don't know what to do, and you don't know who to blame. Everyone's going to tell you that time heals all wounds, but in your head, you're just thinking all time does is throw salt on them. You feel all these things more because you never had been hurt before. And you'll come to get angry at the person who did it to you because they're the first to have done so. Alex tried his best to let out while tears still fell down his face. George felt horrible. He was supposed to be the supportive friend, and Alex was the one who was helping him as if he was the one who just got heartbroken. And George promised himself to remember Alex's words, to be prepared. He would prove that all you need to do is to let the pain subside, so forget about it. Time did heal all wounds, but he wouldn't let anything wound him. George, did you hang up? Dream had broken through his wall of thoughts, and he immediately shook his head. No, I'm here, he responded, letting a heavy breath out. He held his chest come out. I hope Sapnap realizes she was a jerk and moves on. Dream agreed with Chill. So do I, George. He pulled open the curtains to let in the shine of the street lights onto his bedroom floor. Did you work yesterday when I got home? Were you worried? I didn't really worry, George said, not very truthfully. Well, I did, but I know you have a life and you can't spend every night on the phone with someone from the future. Well, when you put it like that, Dream short-lived. I quite enjoy talking to you. I'd happily spend every night on the phone with someone from the future. George didn't know why, but that sentence stung so badly in his chest. But he ignored the feeling and gave a weak laugh. And you say I'm the one who can't get enough of you. Dream put his chin on the palm of his hand. Just know, George, that I'm not a very good liar. So when I said that, George could hear a smile through the phone and roll his eyes. He wished Dream was next to him so he could slap him on the shoulder for saying such a bold thing. You want me to be obsessed with you so bad. I do. I want you to join the club. There's plenty of others that are. Dream joked bravely. But never mind my fan club. How are you? George contemplated his answer for a bit. Not much, honestly. I waited for your calls. Bit though. Dream gave a defeated sigh. I truly am sorry. Except now it gets hit harder than most with this kind of stuff. So it was sort of an emergency. I got home at like 3 in the morning and didn't want to potentially wake you. Good decision, George told him. I'm not a very fun person when woken up. Dream was cackling manically. Now I know what to do to drive you off the wall. Expect calls in the wee hours of the morning from now on. George let go of the phone cord because he was wrapping it around his finger because he had absentmindedly cut off. George had let go of a phone cord because he was wrapping it around his finger because he had absentmindedly cut off. He had absentmindedly cut off some of the circulation. If you do that, Dream, out. You'll what? Dream tested. You're gonna come over to my house and beat me up. Wait, you're already in my house. Might even add our situation in which we're separated her by. George wanted to bang his head into a table. You're so sassy. You're sassier than my sister. I'm not saying something. Nice alteration. Dream complimented, angering George even more. Rolled off the tongue nicely, all those S's. Just shut up already, George begged. But he was finding everything quite amusing, and Dream could tell. What are you up to right now? Dream was sitting on a stool, shaking his leg, wondering whether I should take the time to organize my cassettes or leave them in heap mess. They are now in and go to sleep. George smiled when Dream said cassettes, as he knew music worked a different way than now. Sure, it was accessible, but not nearly as much as it was in his time. I say you organize them if you have a lot. Dream had the 4 baskets full of the cassettes and raised his eyebrows. Organize them it is, he decided, but I'll do it tomorrow instead. This might take a whole day. Alright, George said quietly. What are you going to do then? Dream caught sight of his Les Paul corner of the room and made to grab it. I reckon I can practice guitar. I learned a new song the other day. Ooh, George melted a little one. Dream mentioned he had played with guitar. He had always wanted to get better at it himself and found people who could play instruments interesting. May I hear? Dream hesitated but agreed. I'm not the best, but I'll try. It's going to be a softer version though, since I think it fits the song better. He cleared his throat, and Dream leaned in closer to the phone. Dream strummed a chord. Whoa, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch a long, lonely time. George was a bit surprised at how beautiful Dream's singing voice was. He knew of the song because of his grandpa, but agreed that the song did sound better when it was sung softly, or just in general preferred it in Dream's voice. And time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much. Are you still mine? George listened on, closing his eyes and imagining Dream sitting cross-legged on the floor with the guitar, with the phone near him strumming his guitar in his echoey bedroom, in the very same bedroom he was in now. The thought that Dream had sat in the same place he was in now, singing to himself, sent tingles through his body. Lonely rivers flow to the sea, to the sea, to the open arms of the sea, yeah. Lonely rivers sigh, wait for me, I'll be coming home, wait for me. George took in the lyrics. He had never really cared to listen to what the song was saying, and he regretted never doing so. The words were so bittersweet and desperate that he could almost hear himself saying them. I need your love, Godspeed your love to me. There was silence after Dream strummed his last chord. Are you there? And George turned to the phone. Yeah, just wow, I didn't expect that. You thought I was going to suck, weren't you? No, George explained. I meant your speaking voice is different from your singing voice. It's softer and fits the song. Also, your guitar playing is really good. Thank you, Dream said as he put his guitar back on the stand in the corner. I messed up a few times, but other than that, yeah, I really like the song. I've had it on repeat lately and learned the chords by myself. What's the song called, Dream? George had asked, yawning slightly. Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers. George took out his cell phone and made to add the song to a playlist when he realized he didn't fit any of his existing ones. Instead, he created a new one, calling it Flowers from 1970, in reference to Dream, and added the song to that. He also made a mental note to find more songs to the playlist and to play it out loud to Dream over the phone someday when he considered it finished. He tried guitar. It's really hard. George put down his cell phone. So that's quite impressive, especially that you learned yourself. Dream was glad that George admired his playing and singing. No one knew he did so, not even Sapnap. He just told Sapnap that he had the guitar as a gift, but never played. And he secretly spent hours playing in his room, practicing for hours on end. Having someone to hear results of his hard work to find it impressive meant a lot to him. Are these kinds of songs still a thing, Dream asked, or is that something else you think you shouldn't tell me? George thought for a moment. Well, I know of them, and so do a good amount of people, but other than that, they're not really playing everywhere much anymore. Dream found that interesting, especially since both of his parents had just adored the Beach Boys and made sure he and his sister knew every song. Bummer. They're quite good. I don't know much about the discography from your time, but you can make me a list of songs to try and listen to, so I'll educate myself more on them more. George offered, and Dream heartwarmed at how George became an interest in one of his favorite artists. I will soon, but unfortunately now I am a little sleepy. I think I should turn in for a night. Dream yawned loudly. Good night, Dream. George felt empty after saying it, but he knew he had more nights to talk to him, that he shouldn't be possessive over his time. Good night, George, Dream replied, and don't forget to check on those flowers, he added. George smiled before hanging up the phone and laying on his bed. He played the playlist which he made for Dream on repeat, which only included one song, so he fell asleep to the song on repeat. Part 15. Dream could have taken advantage of George's calls. He could have asked for winners of future sports game and bet on them to become rich. He could ask for secrets of the future and use it for personal gain. But what did Dream want? All he wanted was to talk to George. Give him the opportunity to speak to someone 50 years ahead of him, and all he wanted to do was talk to a lonely boy who's never had someone care about him the way he did. Dream never had intentions that helped himself. Maybe in the beginning, his curiosity led to longing for more answers, but after getting to know George, all of that disappeared. It was replaced by what he saw a beautiful friendship. These phone calls were their little secrets, their few hours in the dark, gloomy nights to relax and be themselves to someone who would comfort and laugh with them. It was something the both of them had gotten used to. George had woken up groggy, having slept in an uncomfortable position all night. He made to check the time on his phone, but realized it had died due to the song playing on his phone during the night. He groaned and got up, almost falling over but catching himself on time. He decided to get breakfast and go on a walk since it was such a nice day outside, and since it'd be perfect since his phone would be charged by that time. After eating a couple of leftovers and brushing his teeth, he ran back to his room to his phone, unplugging it before going back downstairs. The sun was newly risen and illuminated the neighborhood in such a way getting up and walking across the newly sprinkled grass. Water slightly seeping through materials of shells, but not enough to throw him off the course of his good day. No plans had been made, and George was going nowhere in particular. He decided it was better to walk than drive, because his cardio had been awful and something he needed to work on. Town Square was close enough to walk that it was bearable, so far enough to get some good exercise in. It housed various shops and restaurants, including Carl's flower store. In fact, George had not been back to Town Square since he had gone to Carl's store. It was a 15-minute walk, and he took his time because he liked listening to songs during his walk, and so he'd walk to the beat of music, which in this case was slower. Once he arrived, he had not been hungry, so he skipped over all the small cafes and fast food places, and explored the stores he had never seen before. There was an old sort of rundown arcade that still attracted a lot of kids and adults who longed for a hint of nostalgia. A shop for teas had free taste testing, which George had a blast in, and other hidden gems George had never known about. While he was walking, he stepped on a piece of gum on the floor. He made a disgusting face as he lifted his shoe and began to stretch concrete with it. He kicked his shoe on the pavement, attempting to peel it off. After he had successfully cleaned his shoe, he looked up and saw a small door to his left. He would never have seen it if he hadn't stopped in the front of the door. It was a bookstore with paint on its windows, missing some letters due to peeling. George was immediately drawn to it, walking mindlessly inside as a cowbell rang on the door opened. It was much bigger than what he had expected after seeing it from the outside. There were aisles that had housed not only books, but music as well, including records, cassettes, and CDs. The thing that caught his eye, though, was who was behind the counter. It was Techno. He was bagging a book for a customer, thanking them for their purchase, and after seeing they had a child, he included a sheet of stickers and a bookmark. His true colors for children were showing. He really didn't hate children. George walked over confidently, and Techno didn't notice him until he was right in front of the counter. He was still toying with the cash register, looking down. Hello. Techno looked up and saw it was George. George, I've never seen you here before. George looked around, eyebrows raised. Well, I've never been here before. Techno nodded. I know. I usually get the same customers, and I know them all by now, so seeing you here is a surprise. George eyed the shelves behind the counter, prompting new arrivals and books whose stocks were low. On the bookstand was a book called The Art of War, almost proudly displayed in the center of the top shelf. So you work here. That's a cool thing. Techno chuckled slightly. I own this place, he clarified, and George was shocked and impressed at the same time. Techno's appearance never gave off such an energy that implied that he worked at such a place. How'd you get it? George asked. Did you buy it yourself? The pink highlighted haired man shook his head, the fang earrings hanging on his left ear jingling as he did so. Dad owned it, he explained, gesturing to a big store around him. Wilbur was never one for reading books, but I was an English major, and he knew I did, so he left it all to me after he retired. People in George's life never failed to surprise him. Who would have thought this intimidating man was an English major who ended up owning a bookstore? He never knew how lovely it was to ask and get to know other people for the first time. Business seems well. That's quite impressive. It's steady, yeah. Techno shrugs. I'm saving up money for a few things while trying to keep this place running. Saving money for what? George inquired curiously. A new computer for Tommy. He spilled Coke on it. Wilbur's been needing help with money for buying a new car, so that's something too, and he has a due for a bit. A plane ticket. George found it sweet for his first two options for purchases involved Wilbur and Tommy, but he wanted to learn more about plane ticket. A plane ticket? Do you want to go on a vacation? No. Techno played with cash register some more. I have a close friend I've been planning on visiting. He's my best friend, but he doesn't live here. George raised his eyebrows up and down with a smile. Do they live nearby? Techno laughed. Not even close. If only Techno knew how much George had related to him. Both had someone they cared about far away from them. The only difference was all Techno had to do was buy a plane ticket, while George's situation was a bit more complicated than his. I hope it works out for you then, Techno. And George turned around to check if there were customers waiting in line, in case he had been clogging it up. After seeing no one, he had added, I'll go look for some books. I've been meaning to start reading more. Techno agreed and proceeded to help a customer that just arrived. George picked up 2 books that had piqued his interest, and made to pay for them. When he saw the cassette aisle, he walked over, checking them out. He had no cassette player, but he knew Dream liked cassettes, so he wanted to see what they had in stock. He pulled some out. There were some Elvis Presley ones, Doris Day, and also every Beatles and Beach Boy album. When he reached the letter R section, he pulled out each cassette, reading the names until he reached one with no design, just Unchained Melody by Phil Righteous Brothers plus more, written in thick black pen on his white label. George was giddy, and though he did not own anything that could play the cassette, he decided to purchase it anyway, to tell June about it later. He once again met Techno at the counter, who counted up his total price. You forgot this, George told him, pushing the cassette toward him. Techno picking it up, eyeing it. Good choice, he told George. Haven't heard this one in a while. You've heard it? If you're talking about this particular tape, then yes. Techno nodded, handing it back to him. I've heard every song on it. A lot of records and cassettes are our own stock. George took the tape back. You forgot to charge me, he chuckled. Techno shrugged. Nah, take it. We have a hard time getting cassettes out since people don't buy them anymore. You're probably the first one in months. George smiled and thanked the man. He took all of his stuff and waved goodbye. Techno gave a salute of 2 fingers as he walked out the door. Later that night, George sat on his bed reading one of his new books he had purchased. The phone was kept plugged in, and a few minutes before Dream was scheduled to call, he only got out a few paragraphs of a chapter he was reading. He only got a few paragraphs of a chapter he was on before the phone started ringing. George looked around for anything he could use to mark his place in the book, as dog-earing pages had always been a pet peeve of his. He found an old food receipt and stuck it in between pages before making to answer the phone. George, how's my favorite guy from 2020? Dream greeted, his voice a little raspy. George furrowed an eyebrow tight. Are you talking to me? He asked sarcastically, making Dream laugh. Don't remember having talked to anyone else from 2020 lately, so I assume so. They both correlated for a bit more before settling down. They had talked about each other's day. Dream spoke about how he managed to argue the kid he was coaching out of suspension and getting for rival teams some sort of punishment, resulting in getting cussed at by a few angry parents as he walked past them with his head high, paying them no mind while spinning his baseball hat. Were you actually that confident? George questioned him skeptically, and James scoffed. You said it yourself, he shrugged. I'm so full of myself. Don't forget me mentioning how obsessed you are with me. George added, and Dream was a little surprised at this newfound confidence. Yeah. Dream let out a small breath. Where would this old man be without you? He pushed the joke, knowing it was the best way to respond without seeming too weakened by the statement. George caught sight of a cassette tape he had bought on his desk. Oh, Dream, he said. I found a cassette of the song you sang last night. Ooh, Dream was interested. Play out loud. George scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Yeah, I don't actually have anything to play with. Dream was silent for a moment. Would you like to have a Walkman? Yes, he asked. I have an extra one still in the box. I reckon it can survive 50 years, right? I don't know, George said truthfully. Buried in a backyard, setting for 50 years worth of sprinklers and rain. Dream came up with an idea. I have an idea, but it involves ruining the walls again. George made a sound indicating he was tired of all the wall ruining, when in reality he didn't mind it. When is it? George tried knocking on the phone. It seems pretty thick. Maybe I can cut out a little place to keep the box in, and also use it to send you more items as well. George sighed. Alright, try. Dream took out Red Swiss Army knife and pulled out the small blade, cutting through the wall and coughing through the dust that emerged. George watched as cracks appeared on the wall, right next to the sketch of his face. Nothing in the house had changed since 1970, but most of the items were either stolen or taken with the last people who lived here. In the house, presumably Dream. So leaving stuff out wouldn't have worked. Dream had successfully cut a square into the wall, and surprisingly, the inside was hollow and full of old insulation. He looked under his bed and found the Walkman box, putting it into the space and covering of the wall again. Done, he announced. George made it to push the wall open, but realized that cracks had grown enough mold to seal it shut again. He knocked on it before punching it repeatedly. Whoa there, Dream asked. Of your phone, you alright? Yeah, George punched again. Just need to. Yes! The square cut out of the wall had fallen through, and George was met with a cloud of dust, and the smell was quite foul. He briefly put his hand in the square and patted around the area until his hands found the old box. The box was a bit dirty, but when he opened the contents were still mint condition. It was crazy the things that could survive 50 years. Thank you, Dream. No problem, George. Dream smiled. Do you know how to use it? Is the question. Nope. George eyed the device, trying to figure it out. It was quite embarrassing how much knowledge he lacked in old technology. Dream had walked him through how to use it until George finally got the tape and pressed play. The first few seconds of Unchained Melody played, but it was more curious about what the other songs on the tape were. He asked Dream how to skip a song, and after being taught, he skipped. He held it to the phone as the first notes of a song started from the Walkman. I will by the Beatles, Dream explained. I've been meaning to add that to a tape. I love that song. Will I wait till a lonely lifetime? If you want me to, I will. He sang, and George let the song play until the end of it. Dream enjoyed it so much. They had listened to each other and every song on the tape, with Dream knowing most of them and singing along. George enjoyed hearing him sing because amidst the joking sung lyrics was a great singing voice. The singing had both made them sleep eventually, and they both said goodnight and hung up on the phone. They lay in their beds, deprived of their one niece again. Little did George Davidson know that in the grass of his small front yard, a leaf blooms out of a packed soil, ready to live. Part 16. Wilbur had texted George at 6 in the morning, asking for his help. Hello, George. I do apologize that this text finds you so early in the morning, but I would like to ask a favor. Are you busy today? George, it's no problem. I woke up early anyway, but no, I don't have any plans as far as I know. George was curious as to what the favor was. He thought it might have been an invitation or something, but at first, but now he was semi-serious. No, but from how semi-serious Wilbur's tone was, he knew it wasn't that case. Wilbur, are you good with kids? George, I'm not horrible, I guess. Why? Wilbur, would you be able to watch over Tommy? I know it can be a handful, but my family and I have found ourselves in sort of an emergency, and all adults are needed. George, is everything okay? Also, yes, I reckon I can watch Tommy. Wilbur, I'm going to be honest, I'm quite unsure. There's a lot going on right now. I've taken a work leave, and Techno's even closed his store for the rest of the week. We all just hope everything will be fine. Thank you for your concern. We appreciate it. George, no problem. I hope everything turns out okay, whatever it is. But anyways, would you like to bring Tommy here, or should I go to yours? It's alright if you come to ours. He's easy to take care of when he's entertained and out of your hair and all the stuff he has to entertain him is here. George, yeah, sounds good. I can be there in an hour. Whatever. That works out. Thank you again. We definitely owe you one. George plugged his phone in while he went to the kitchen to make himself a bowl of cereal, as it was the fastest to make and eat. After that, he rushed to wash his face and change out of his pajamas, finishing faster than he expected. He asked Wilbur if he could come earlier than he had planned. Wilbur said it was actually convenient, since Sally, and Techno were leaving soon. It took a couple of turns in attempts to find their house in the neighborhood, but after George spotted the number painted on the curbside, he parked on the side of the road before locking his car and knocking at the door. The house was decorated beautifully on the outside, with a roof lined in hanging flowers, a white archery on the path to the door, and wind chimes that sang together as the last of warm summer wind blew on them. The door in front of him opened, revealing Sally. George! She gave him a hug, surprising him, but he found himself hugging back. I'm so sorry that this was so last minute. George dropped his keys on accident and leaned down to pick them up before looking to Sally again. No. You've been great company to me lately, and this is something I feel like I owe you. Oh, don't be silly, Sally smiled. You don't owe us anything for friendship. Wilbur walked up behind her, carrying a small backpack of things. His eyes looked dreadful. They were baggy and dark, and the amount of hours he had slept the previous night could be determined by his face alone. George, good to see you, he greeted, patting him on the shoulder. Thank you for coming by so early. Tommy's up in his bedroom right now, still asleep. He wakes up in 10 minutes. Wilbur gave Sally the backpack to load into the car, where Techno was already sitting there steering wheel waiting for them. Wilbur led George inside, showing him where everything was kept and also where he had put Tommy's meals, which were pre-prepared for George's convenience. He urged him to not hesitate to call if there was an emergency, and that he could eat whatever he wanted from the kitchen if he should ever get hungry. That should be it, Wilbur told him as he led George into the living room. The TV and computer is all yours to use. The TV has a password lock on YouTube, since we found out that he was finding content he shouldn't have been watching. It's written on the back of the cable box. George was amused, wondering what world Tommy had found on YouTube that caused his family to restrict him from it permanently. Thank you, Wilbur. I think I can manage. Once it's bedtime, to see her nap. Wilbur's eyes widened as he shook his head. We can never get him to nap, so we just make him sleep early. Hopefully we'll be back before he has to sleep for night, though. Sounds good. George took note. I hope wherever you guys are heading off to is well for you, and everything turns out fine. Wilbur was getting teary-eyed, managing to grin. He said, "We hope so too. I'll be off now. Make sure to double lock the doors." George nodded in understanding, and after Wilbur had walked out, he had locked both locks on the door. He heard footsteps coming from the stairs and found Tommy rubbing his eyes with his nubby hand and spotting George. Mom and Dad left already? Yeah, George told him. You just missed them, but they said goodbye while you were asleep. Tommy nodded. Can I play computer? He asked hopefully, but George said. I had to sadly say no. Your dad said you could after breakfast, but only for an hour. He lets me after I finish my worksheets too. Tommy let him know, and George nodded with a smile. He did mention that, yes. George then went to the kitchen to get him his breakfast. What do you want to eat? Tommy made a thinking face. I want to mix every cereal we have in kitchen. Dad never lets me do that. But if you let me, I won't tell him. Tommy said cheerfully, hoping he'd get away with this. George contemplated for a second before deciding it would be best to get all the kids' good side in case it might help later if he got fussy. Except for one of the raisins. Tommy made a disgusting face. That's Mom's cereal and it sucks. George chuckled. I'll make sure to skip that box then. Tommy had sat down, finishing his last few bites of Franken cereal before running up to his room. Want to come? I can show you my cool house in Minecraft. George followed after him, nearly slipping on the stairs because of his socks. Tommy led him into a bedroom where the door had a sign that read boys only except for Mom. George laughed before going inside the boys' room. He had many figurines and posters of various things he enjoyed. There were lots of Zelda posters, Animal Crossing amiibos, and every Minecraft mob's figurine sitting on a little shelf above his bed. Wow, you remember every mob, George told him, impressed. I don't see a gas, though. Tommy furrowed his brow. I do have a gas. Look. Tommy flicked off the lights in his room and pressed a button on a small remote, illuminating a lantern above his bed. The lantern was a gas, and George had to admit it was quite awesome. Tommy turned on the lights again before booting up his computer. Someone bought me a new computer. I don't know who, but Uncle Techno delivered it. George remembered Techno mentioning that he would like to get Tommy a new computer after he spilled Coke on his old one. Maybe Uncle Techno got it. No, Tommy shook his head. He wouldn't. Tommy and George had played Minecraft, and Tommy had even taught George how to call Devils so he could play with them. They argued a lot, but George could tell they were best of friends, and no amount of conflict could be resolved between them. Tubbo had to go because his parents told him he had to finish his math practice, which reminded George of Tommy's limit. You have 5 more minutes, reminded the boy, who surprisingly nodded in agreement. Do you know where my mom and dad went? Tommy asked. George shook his head sadly. No. Oh, Tommy said. I do. They went to the doctor's. Oh no, George said concerned. Is everyone alright? Can I tell you a secret? Tommy asked, pausing his game and turning around to face George. Sure, kid. I get up at night to play computer when I'm supposed to be sleeping. I lock my door and Mom and Dad never see me. George laughed. Better not get caught doing that then. Don't worry, I won't, the boy said confidently. Anyway, I was planning on playing Minecraft in the night when I heard everyone going crazy outside. But people came. Even my Aunt Alyssa had come to visit us. I do like Aunt Alyssa. I peeked outside my room and saw my dad running downstairs. When I looked out of the window, he was driving away. George didn't want to be nosy and use the boy for knowledge, but curiosity got the best of him. Where did he go? I think the doctor, but I tiptoed outside and Mom was on the couch, and Dad and Grandpa were not there, Tommy said before turning off his computer. Do I have to do my worksheets now? George thought about what the boy had told him before nodding his head. Yeah, then you can play again after. Okay. He looked disappointed, but made to finish his work anyway. He had helped Tommy sharpen his pencils when his phone started ringing. It was Wilbur. Hey, Wilbur. Hello, George. Wilbur greeted. You being a good kid? Yeah, he answered He answered honestly. He's doing his worksheets now. Wow, it's hard for us to get him to do that. Good job. Wilbur laughed. Is everything okay now? It is for now. Wilbur sounded relieved. But that the situation has stabilized, but we're still unsure. I'm glad it's fine for now. Can I speak with Tommy? Wilbur asked, and George said yes, handing Tommy the phone. He put his pencil down. Hi, Dad. Hello, Tommy. What'd you have for breakfast? Tommy's eyes widened as he looked to George, who had a smile on his face. I had cereal, Dad. Really? What kind? Tommy stuttered. The raisin ones. Oh, but you hate that cereal. Wilbur said skeptically. Sorry, can't talk, Dad. I'm doing work, he said, before scrambling to hand the phone back to George. Did he mix every cereal? Wilbur asked George. Yeah. George told him honestly, and Wilbur started laughing. Don't worry. At least now he's done it, and he won't ask again. I have to go back for now. I think that we should be back in an hour or two. That's what it's looking like. I was just checking. Over. George ended the call. Tommy, your dad's gonna be back soon. Okay. Tommy looked up from his paper. Will Grandpa be back too? I don't know. He never mentioned if your grandpa would. Sorry, kid. Tommy nodded his head slowly. I like Grandpa. He shows me a lot of things. Such as? He showed me how to kickbox, and he also showed me how to fight Uncle Techno. Tommy said proudly, flexing his little arms. He seems like a very fun grandpa, George said, highly amused by the young child in front of him striking hero poses. He is. Tommy scrambled numbers onto his math worksheet. He tells me stories too. I heard he likes telling stories. George remembered that Wilbur and Techno mentioned it. What did he tell? I know they're fake, but Dad believes them. He said he had evidence. Tommy did air quotes. What does that word even mean, George? It means proof. What does the word proof mean then? Tommy raised a brow. Never mind, George smiled. I'm done with my worksheets, but I'm hungry. Tommy stacked his papers and put them into a little folder. Can I eat lunch early? George didn't see a problem with that. I suppose so. Come on. They went to the kitchen, and George heated up Tommy's lunch. He also found another box of the same meal, with George, if you ever get hungry, right on a sticky meal. He heated it up as well, and they both ate together. My dad plays music while we eat. Tommy gestured over to a shelf with a Bluetooth speaker, record, and cassette tape. Can you play Bruno Mars? George agreed, trying to connect his cell phone to the speaker, and after failed attempts, managed to play Bruno Mars on it. Tommy was drumming his hands on the table between bites, which George found amusing. He was some kid. Has it been an hour yet? Not yet. George checked his phone for time. 15 more minutes. Time sucks. It goes so slowly. Tommy crossed his arm. George had never agreed with a 6-year-old child more. Do you miss your mom and dad that bad? No, Tommy answered, and George almost spit his food out laughing. I mean, I do miss them, but I wanted to ask Dad for a new video game when he's back, that's all. Tommy had finished eating, and George made to wash their spoons and throw off the old food boxes. Tommy told George he would play Minecraft and call Tubbo again, and that George was allowed to watch TV in the living room if he wanted. George found the fact that Tommy bossed him around very, very amusing. He was a very outlandish child. He had decided to go upstairs with Tommy anyway. So when Wilbur and Sally came back, it didn't look like he was careless and left Tommy by himself. A doorbell rang through the house, and Tommy told Tubbo he'd be back before muting himself and running down to the door. He couldn't reach the second lock, so he gestured for George to hurry up and open it for him. Wilbur and Sally stood at the door, Techno pulling out of the driveway. Sally gave Tommy a hug. "Did you have fun?" "Yes," Tommy told her. "I like George. He plays Minecraft." Sally looked at George proudly. "I'm glad you had fun, Tommy." She sniffed the air in her house. "I assume you already had lunch then? That's good." "Yes, I'm full, Mom." Tommy turned to his dad. "Where's Grandpa? Is he still in the car?" Wilbur knelt down beside his son. "Actually, Grandpa's going to be staying at the doctor's for now, Tom." "Why? Did he forget to eat apples? Mom always said they kept the doctor away." Sally gave a small smile to her son. "No, Tommy. He just has to be with the doctor right now. But you know him. He's strong. He'll be back home to play with you again." "Okay," Tommy exclaimed. "If he's going to be back, then that's okay." He and his mom walked towards the bedroom as Sally wanted to check on the work he had done. Wilbur walked over to George, holding his bills in hand. George waved the money away. No, please, you don't have to pay me." Wilbur gave him the money anyway. "We owe it to you." George hesitantly took the money and pocketed it. "Is your father okay?" Wilbur let a breath of air out of his mouth, blowing the hair on top of his head slightly. "We don't know. He's usually physically capable and healthy, but this time came out of nowhere." He said he always saw it coming though. But that time's running out. He said he always had it coming though. That time's running out. George was a little saddened by that his father could say such a thing. "Can't promise anything, but I hope it passes and everything will be okay with him." "You know you do," Wilbur said quietly. "I should head home," George told him. "I want to try and get some work done early." Wilbur thanked him again for taking care of Tommy and waved him goodbye as he drove out. "Who knew you'd be good with kids?" Dream chuckled. It was nighttime and they had been on the phone together again. "What's that supposed to mean? I have a little sister, you know." "I know," Dream smiled. "Just didn't expect that, that's all." "Well, I guess I expected it coming from you, sister. I coach baseball for children," George remarked jokingly. Dream collapsed onto his bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Kids are cool, I guess." "Some are, yeah," George responded, collapsing onto his bed as well. "So what did you do today?" "I drove to my mom's again. It's far, but I drove back home anyway." "What'd you do there?" George asked. "Help her organize her books. She has so many and she wants to sell them soon." Dream explained, turning to lay on his side. George pointed his fingernails. "That's a good way to make money." "Yeah," Dream agreed. "I missed you, George." "Again?" George asked. "It's been one day." "Well, yeah. Still, it's nice having someone to talk to after a long day," Dream admitted. George agreed. He did miss Dream as well. He wished he could hang out with him the way he hung out with Wilbur and his family, easily accessible. He wished there was a way for them to be closer. Their type of distance was different than the normal. "Dream," he exhaled. "Completely missed you too." Dream smiled, putting the minute around his hands. Clay, he said after a while. "What?" "My name," Dream said. "It was Clay." George was surprised. He had forgotten that he had never known Dream's real name. He had gotten so used to a nickname. "Can I still call you Dream?" Dream laughed. "Of course you can," he permitted. "I like the way you say it. Anyways." George felt flattered. "Thank you, Dream." Dream closed his eyes, imagining a world in where time had given them a chance. Dream finally came to accept that through these calls, these talks, these little breaks and these little back and forths with George had fallen. With George, he had fallen for him. It was so there, inevitable. But he finally got the chance to meet George. When he'd finally get the chance to meet George, it would be too late. Time would already be running out. Dream knew how to accept his feelings. He never suppressed or denied anything he had felt before. Accepting his feelings for George had been easy. It would be easy, but accepting the fact that if George reciprocated his feelings, it would never work out. It was the most difficult thing he had ever tried to do in his entire life. It was just as people say, bad timing. He was angry at time. He wanted to torture it as it had tortured him. He wanted to ask the universe why it had given him the best thing he ever had just to take every chance of him ever having it away from him. He said goodnight to George so he wouldn't have to hear the voice he had fallen in love with while his thoughts were full of absolute full of ache. He wished one thing he would never have to long for. Relief of his feelings and for George to dissipate. George was confused that dreams had depart. He couldn't handle not hearing his voice anymore. They both lay in their own beds, in their time, in the same room of the same house, but so far away. All of this while the wind blow with a single stem blooming from George's backyard mockingly. The flower could survive young and beautiful from 1970, but couldn't wait for Dream. Part 18. The flowers were fine, George thought. He had gone outside and noticed the calendia slowly blooming, and a sense of relief overtook his body, knowing he wasn't a complete screw-up at gardening. He made a mental note to tell Dream about it later tonight. Then he remembered. Dream had not called him the past week. The first night he was worried, but understood that sometimes Dream got caught up in things, and he'd apologize for forgetting to call the next day. That was not the case. It happened two, then three more nights until George was starting to get worried. His mind filled with things that could have happened, all negative. The worst scenario, that being the reason Dream had not visited him in 2020 was because he had lost his life before, maybe in 1970. He took these thoughts from his head and tried to think of positive things, like the flowers finally growing. He walked back into his house and bedroom, trying not to meet eyes with the telephone because he'd only get worried again. Instead, he reached for his cell phone, charging up a desk, and saw he had missed texts. He unlocked his phone and read them. They were from Wilbur. George, I'm sorry. George, good morning. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to babysit Tommy again. I actually wanted to see if you'd like to come over for dinner tonight. The last seat was actually reserved for my father, but he's at the hospital. Nonetheless, he insisted someone fill his seat as he didn't want it to go to waste. George had not been out to a proper dinner since he lived with his family in England. Once he had been too strictly business related with colleagues, with the talk being mainly about work, so he didn't count those. George, are you sure your father doesn't mind? Wilbur's typing bubble appeared right away. Wilbur, well, he insisted a lot, so I'd assume not. I'd like that. Then when and where? 6:30 at Fleming's. Get better to get there at 6. George's eyes widened. Fleming's had the biggest pricest restaurants around in town. Even the wealthiest people George knew lived here couldn't afford eating there more than once or twice a year. George, I'll be there. Wilbur, FYI, there's a dress code. If you need a suit or anything, let me know. George, I'm pretty sure I can dig one out of my closet. Thank you, Wilbur. Wilbur, don't sweat it, mate. See you there. George looked at his phone and started to overthink. He calculated how long it would probably take to eat dinner. There it started at 6:30, maybe even later if it included waiting for the food. He definitely would not make it back to his house by 8 o'clock when Dream would call. As much as it hurt him, he hoped Dream wouldn't call. At least not on the one night that he wasn't at home waiting. He couldn't bring himself to decline Wilbur's offer. Reserving a seat for Minx required a payment himself, and Wilbur's father, who was horribly sick, had said that he did not want his seat going to waste. There was no way to say no to Wilbur without paining him. So he threw all clothes out of the closet one by one until he found a suit that was intact enough to wear. He ironed it out until not a fold could be seen, and dug into his drawer for a tie that went with it. It was a black suit with a small chain hanging from the front pocket. He paired it with a white collar button-up and black trousers with a belt. He had been scared to wear it until the very last minute he had to go, as he was clumsy and he just knew he'd spill something on it or damage it in any other way. Once it had hit 5:30, George had put on the suit. He took a look at himself in his full-length mirror, and he never bothered looking at himself. Not only did he seem quite full of himself, but he thought he looked quite dapper and handsome. Thoughts then consumed his brain. He would have loved to have Dream see him in something like this, especially since all outfits he had described himself wearing to Dream, he had been casual and not wearing anything and not that interesting. Took one last look at the phone, praying that he wouldn't miss a phone call, and once more, Dream was okay. He made his way to the car and drove over to the Minx, which was perched on top of a small hill. To his dismay, he paid valet parking. He chose to park his car himself near the front, so it was faster to get to, and he didn't have to pay anything. He must have been early because he had not seen any of his family anywhere, so he sat down on one of the benches and waited for them. He watched the cars that would pass by giving their keys to a valet parking worker, and walked towards the restaurant in their best clothes and jewels. He wondered what kind of lives they had, and why they could afford to eat at such a place. Wives in their silkiest of dress, clutching their arms around husbands with most bejeweled watches. He wondered how happy they could be with all that money. George busied himself with observing until he got to the third car in the valet line, where two brothers stepped out. One with his wife and kid. It was Wilbur, and his family looking fancier than they had ever seen him before. He couldn't even fathom the cost of Sally's dress, which is sparkling in the last of the sun before it set as she was helped out of the car by Wilbur, who was looking great himself. Techno had appeared to have gotten a haircut, and even Tommy was in a suit acting on his best behavior. Wilbur handed his keys to the valet man and led his family over to the revolving door where George sat at. "George!" Wilbur greeted excitedly, giving him a hug. "Looking fresh, mate. Have you gone inside?" "No." George played with his sleeve of a white button up that was exposed under a black suit. I was waiting for you guys, actually." "Oh, well then, let's go in," Wilbur suggested. But Tommy was already ahead of him, playing with a revolving door. Sally made her way to stop him, but ended up having to chase him through a spinning door on a different panel as she laughed and kept the door spinning. George walked in after Tommy, and Sally had finished their hilarious chase around the door. The restaurant looked like a mini cathedral with paintings of angels and other such beautiful scenery surrounding him. The calendars held real wax candles that illuminated the restaurant in the most perfect way, leaving his face in a yellowish glow. Wilbur spoke with one of the people at the reservation lectern, who nodded at him continuously before checking his book for Wilbur's name. After a while, Wilbur gestured for them to follow the man to their table, which was circular with a white tablecloth and a running glass circle with food within it food for. After the party had sat down, waiter informed them that he'd be back in a bit to ask them what their drinks would like. This place is cool, but it looks old, Dad. But this looks old, Tommy. Sorry. This place is cool, but it looks old, Dad, Tommy said as he played with a handkerchief on his plate, which had been folded into his wand. That's because it is old. It's been up since 1916, Wilbur informed his son. Instead of being impressed, looked disappointed that it had been an older place. Tommy continued fidgeting with his handkerchief, making Sally laugh as she hugged him from the side. Techno sat casually looking over the menu. "Thank you again, Wilbur," George said from the other side of the table from him. "It must have cost a fortune." Wilbur laughed and shook his head. "Oh, no," he denied. "This was paid for by an old friend of my dad. He co-owned this restaurant, and after hearing Dad was in Florida, he offered to treat us to a dinner. Of course, Dad couldn't come because and he was quite sad about it. But he made us keep the reservation anyway." "I call him Mr. Halo," Tommy told George, because one time I was playing with my food when I flung an onion ring over his head, and Uncle Techno said it looked like a halo. Techno snickered from behind the menu, and the rest of the family looked over to him. "So you're the reason Tommy calls him that?" Sally asked while staring him down. Techno put his hands up. "Look, he's a cool guy. He didn't mind." He tried explaining himself, but Sally was shaking her head, though George caught her smiling. "Anyway," Wilbur continued, "yeah, this really didn't cost us, so you definitely don't know us." Waiter came by asking them what they wanted to order. It was an all-you-can-eat restaurant since it was seats that had to be paid for, so George didn't have to look for the cheapest stuff on the menu. He ordered a steak with some gourmet mashed potatoes and vegetables with soup on the side. Everyone told the waiter their orders, and Sally ordered for Tommy before the waiter walked away, and they waited their food. They immersed themselves in conversations. They talked about their childhoods, jobs, and what they enjoyed doing in their free time. A couple of conversations were fit in before the waiter came with their food, which was plated beautifully and smelled amazing. George's mouth watered as he cut into his steak and took a bite. It was perfect. The Wilbur family had obviously eaten here before because they seemed to be used to ornate decorations and skillful cooking of their meals. George continued to eat, embarrassingly faster than anyone else at the table, who didn't seem to mind. James sat by the phone, digging his hands into his hair. It was 7:58, and he wanted to call George because he had put it off for over a week. He felt selfish because he knew George had probably been worried and lonely because Dream had not called to him to benefit himself. It was a simple, "I can't live without you, can't live without you." He couldn't live with talking to George any longer, knowing he could never have him. And couldn't live without the comfort and happiness that George brought to him that no one else had done in a while. But tonight he wanted to explain. He wanted to tell George how he felt. He wanted to say sorry that this had to be the last phone call. And if he wanted to hear anything from the first time, it was if George had loved him back, even if it was last time. He knew he wanted to hear it at least once. He took a pen and scribbled in his notebook, September 8th, 1970/2020. To him, I say I love you, and goodbye. He dialed the phone and waited George's usual quick answer. Nothing came. He called over and over, but it dawned the same result. He immediately knew he had messed up not calling George. He must have been angry and dodging the calls now. He started banging his fist on the table, crying. He was lost on what to do, and he was even more lost on how he felt. He knew this would hurt George, yet he was still doing it to save his own feelings. But he wasn't just saving his own. He was saving George's too. It was making sure George would move on. If George felt the same way, continuing the calls and falling for each other more and more would make it worse for both of them. This was the right decision. He knew once more that he wrote what he was about to write. There was no turning back. He glanced at the sketch of George on the wall, clicked his pen, and started to write on the last page of the notebook. To my next of kin, a friend, whoever I pass these notes on to, I know I have asked so much from you. I will make one last request. On September 9th, 2020, 9:30 a.m., I would like you to... Wilbur and Techno's phones were vibrating simultaneously. Wilbur picked his up. Hello? Wilbur listened to his speaker on the other end before getting up quickly. Oh, shoot. He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. Sally, I gotta go. It's Dad and there's an emergency. Stay here and eat, he told him, still on the phone. Wait, Will, I'll go with you. Techno got up as well, taking one last french fry and eating it. The valet will take forever. Wilbur was speaking on the phone. He wants to see who? Wilbur furrows his brows before he looked to George. George, I'm sorry, but do you think you can take us? George was done eating. He looked at the frantic rubbers, wanting to help. Of course, I didn't park valet. I can take you guys wherever you need to go. It'll be faster to get my car. He agreed, and Wilbur ended the phone call. The three ran out of the restaurant to George's car. It was 8:30 when they reached the hospital, and Wilbur frankly asked the nurse to visit his dad, and they were led down the farthest hallway where his room was. George let the two brothers have some privacy in there, as he didn't know what was going on. After 10 minutes, Wilbur and Techno walked out of the room, a bit weary. George? Wilbur? George got up and walked to him. Is everything alright? He seized up, but for now he's stabilizing. Wilbur informed him, but George knew there was more, so he had waited. He wants to see you, George, Wilbur finally said, scratching the back of his head, where his hair lay frizzly atop the almond. Me? George looked confused. Why me? Wilbur shrugged sadly. To thank you for bringing us here. Oh, George was fine. I can do that, yeah. Wilbur nodded and led George into the room. He took out his usual pocket notebook and started flipping it through when he reached the last page and made a face. He looked like he'd read something before that he hadn't written there before. And before walking around, leaving George and his father. An old man lay on the bed, IV tube sticking out of his arms, and the contrast sound of a beeping surrounding the area. George wondered why he never went crazy. The man stared at him for a few moments before opening his mouth to talk, but nothing came out. George walked over slowly, awkwardly, before taking a seat on the bed. Seat on a small chair beside the hospital bed. Hello, sir? The man continued to stare at him, slightly shaking. George didn't know if the man had trouble talking or if it was for other reasons. But he felt awkward and didn't know if he should say something else. The silence continued for what felt like forever. The man finally spoke with a raspy, shaky voice. Hello, young man. Hi. George looked at him. I'm friends with your sons. Oh, yes, I've mentioned you before. The old man nodded slowly. His eyes slightly squinted at him. I just wanted to thank you for the things you've done for them. George shook his head and smiled. Oh, they've done much more for me than I have for them. Trust me. The man kept nodding slowly, and then both were put in another slow-moving silence. George was about to say goodbye when the man stopped him. Do you know what the day is, young man? George raised his eyebrows before getting his cell phone checking the date. September 8th, sir. The 8th of September already. How could I be so predictable? Wilbur's father said softly with a small laugh. What is it, sir? George politely asked the man to repeat himself, but he shook his head indicating he was done. He was talking to himself. George got up slowly. Well, it was nice speaking to you, sir, but I'm sure you'd like to speak with your family again, he said as he waved goodbye and walked and started to walk away. George had his hand on the knob and about to open it. The man raised his voice a little. He called. George turned around. Pardon? He called you today, but you didn't answer. George's eyes widened. He started to shake his head and her being increased. Could this man be talking about phone calls? Sorry, sir, George managed to say, but I don't know what you're speaking about. You know damn well what I'm speaking about. He pointed a finger, and George started to walk back towards him, sitting in a chair. George was confused and scared at the same time, and his breath caught in his throat a few times, and he'd have to cough to remember to breathe. Breathe, young man, Wilbur's father urged, as he sat up slowly and carefully. George did so as he finally brought himself to face him. You know about the phone calls? George stuttered on his words, which, to his confusion, highly amused the old man in front of him. The old man chuckled. Of course I do. I know about the phone now. About the phone calls. Are you friends of Clay? George asked, using Jim's real name in case the man never knew about the nickname. Clay, the man started. Boyd, who can lock himself in his room every night just to talk to someone on the phone. George's first assumption that came to mind. Are you Sapnap? The man jumped a little on the mention of a name, before looking George in the eyes and shaking his head slowly and dimly. Sap passed in March. Oh, I'm sorry. That's all George managed to say. Who are you then? There was silence once again. The loudest silence George had ever had to sit through in his entire life, as he tried to shake away the anxiety of another person being in the knowledge of him and Dream's phone calls. I'm an old man, George. He stared deep into George's eyes, so deep he felt his corneas being cut. You called me that yourself. George had started to nod before what the man said sunk in. His eyes widened, his chest pounded violently, as his breath was running out of his throat quicker than he could manage. He looked at the man and saw the familiar green eyes, the eyes on the photo of a man he kept on his desk. A man smiling while holding his cat. Dream? He sputtered. It's you? Talking felt like an earthquake from how much was going on inside his throat. Dream smiled, so his aged eyes filling with tears. How are those flowers, George? George let out a sob before stuffing his face into his hands. All of his worries seemed to subside slowly. Dream was alive, but are they growing all right? Dream once again asked about flowers. George nodded, wiping his tears. The stem's out now. Dream looked reminiscent. After all, George's events were in a span of a few weeks, while for him it had been 50 years. Do you remember why you didn't call this week? Do you remember why you didn't call this week? George had asked bravely, and Dream nodded. I do. George wanted answers. Can you tell me, Dream, please? I was young, George. Obviously, I'm not anymore. The me you're talking to is still young and naive and confused, Dream began, trying his best to hold back his emotions but ultimately failing. Why is he? George tried to level with the man but couldn't understand. Dream put off a question, and he was stupid oft times, but he knew how he felt. George fixed himself onto the couch. How did he feel? Do you love him, George? Dream suddenly asked, and George's eyes widened. George knew he had felt some sort of emotion or pull towards Dream, but he never took the time to think about what it was. All those times he'd change his whole routine to fit Dream's schedule, screams Dream's phone calls. And all those times he'd stare at a handprint on the wall and wonder what it'd be like if they had made them together. He knew how he felt. He just couldn't name it. All this time, he couldn't bring himself to say he was in love. George couldn't help but notice Dream referencing his past self as though he was a different person. Why do you call yourself him? I'll answer your question after you answered mine, Dream said plainly. George took in a deep breath. Yes, I do, he finally admitted, but not to the Dream he had wanted to say it to. Dream nodded, tears filling his eyes slowly. To answer your question, George, I'd be answering all of your others. George nodded, awaiting what Dream had to say. He and I are different people, he began. Maybe not literally, but emotionally. We're in different stages of our lives. I was young, George. Young and in love with you. George jumped a bit after hearing that, getting chills. He continued to listen, but also realistic. I knew I just couldn't be in love with you, he explained. I saw a vase of flowers at Sepnap's house. They just sat in water, dying and cold. They're meant to be in sun, to grow and live. George sat up, unsure where the Dream was going. They had their own place, where they're meant to stay. Yes, maybe a couple days earlier the flowers were beautiful in the vase, but after a while they started to crumble. That's what happens when things don't stay where they're supposed to stay, Dream said. What does this have to do with you and me? The flowers are you and me, Dream elaborated. We're meant to stay in our own place. We can't get caught up trying to live in someone else's. George had taken it in. He didn't know that was what Dream had been feeling lately. Yes, Dream? My heart couldn't be in 2020 when it belonged in 1970. Was all Dream said. That line shattered George's heart to pieces. Dream wasn't done. I want you to move on, George. I know I don't have much time here. I feel like I'm gonna die tomorrow. Don't say that, George snapped. It's true, George. Look what happened when I moved on. You saw what happened. I've met my beautiful family and I love them. That's the life I was given because I knew the inevitability and we would have never worked. It was you I loved, George. There's no doubt about that. It couldn't have happened. Dream scolded as he exhaled, almost apologetically. I can still talk to you over the phone, Dream. You can't. Tomorrow's going to be the 9th of September, George. I made sure you couldn't call again. George was confused. How could Dream have turned out to be so cruel? What do you mean you made sure? George, I did what I did to save you. To help you move on. You know deep down that we never could have happened. Dream started coughing. Beeping on monitor started to increase. George was frantic. Nurse! Dream, you were my flower, George said as he knew it was cheesy, but there was no other way to say how he felt. You said it yourself. Flowers from 1970 can survive that long. He heard footsteps running towards the room, so he backed away as the doctors filled the area around Dream's hospital bed. Dream gave him one last look in the eye. You take care of this flower's wrong number? He said as George's view of him became obstructed by the nurses. Part 19. Clay Soot, also known as Dream by his closest companions, died on September 8th, 2020, 9:59 p.m. at 71 years old. His polite request for George to take care of the flowers were his last known words. He was still capable of talking after that. He just refused to say any more because he wanted his last words to have something to do with George. It was Wilbur who broke the news to George the next time he texted, assuring him it wasn't his fault for any of it, and that Dream himself knew it was his time was running out. George didn't know how to bring himself to talk to Dream over the phone. Knowing his future counterpart had lost his life, Dream remembered that Clay had told him the night before. "You can't. Tomorrow's the 9th of September, George. I made sure you couldn't call." George was trying to understand what that had meant, but he knew he was still going to sit for however long it took, just to wait for her phone to ring. He'd have to keep the fact that he died to himself. He needed to hear Dream's voice again, the dream that he loved, the dream that was alive. George was busy in thought when he heard knocking from downstairs. It took him everything in him to get up and push himself downstairs, not to mention the fact that he had not eaten breakfast yet. He opened the door to Wilbur, who had baggy eyes and about a number scarf and too creepy. "Wilbur?" George let him inside. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." George couldn't even finish his sentence without getting choked up with tears. Wilbur tried his best to smile. "Don't be. Nothing's your fault." George couldn't fathom how much grief him and his family were probably in. His heart broke when he thought of Tommy. Tommy was expecting his grandpa to come back. He couldn't imagine how hard it was for Wilbur as a father to sit him down and tell him the truth. They had just gotten close, too. George helped the man walk inside. His footing had been so unsure and confused. "Why'd you come here, Wilbur?" "I have to tell you something, George." He turned to George, trying his best to keep his composure, but it was obviously backfiring. "Sure, anything." George sat down in front of him, offering a glass of water and some tissues, patting him on the back. Wilbur thanked him before taking a deep breath. "My dad was a great man." His voice shook, and every bit of him was slowly crumbling like a sandcastle that millions of hands were trying to keep together. George nodded. Wilbur had no idea how much he agreed with him. He listened on, taking a sip of water and trying to keep calm, knowing that Wilbur was about to say something about the man he loved, the man who's gone. He'd tell us stories. I remember. Wilbur laughed a little. They were such absurd stories. I believed them, but Taco didn't. He was realistic, but me, I soaked up every word of his storytelling until I fell asleep. I looked ominously in front of him. Stupid one of him climbing a tree to protest not cutting it down. Now he got struck by lightning after, and all those times he and his friend would go out and set fireworks out the sky into the sky at helicopters. George chuckled along with him. He wondered whatever insane things Dream supposedly did in his life. The thought of it warmed and eased his heart a bit. He knew that Dream was satisfied, and he had lived his life the way he wanted to. There was a story for every single night. Wilbur turned to look at George. That was how many he had. I'm sure he loved telling those stories, Will. I'm sure he loved telling those stories as much as he loved hearing them all. George comforted. I did love hearing them. I loved every single one of them. Wilbur's fingers were being more fidgety than usual, but there was one in particular that he'd have so much to talk about. George was genuinely interested. And what story was that? The story of a boy who used to speak to on the phone. George felt his heart beat stop for a second. Dream told his kids about him? More importantly, Wilbur knew about the calls the whole time. Wilbur didn't wait for a response. He just continued. The way he'd tell the story felt so real. I just knew he wasn't lying to me. He never did. Then what? Then I grew up, of course. I stopped believing in Santa, then the Tooth Fairy, and then eventually all of God's stories. Wilbur looked down at his hands, playing with his rings. He glanced at the clock, then hurried his speech. I met a woman, got married, had a kid, and he knew that. He knew I wasn't a little boy. that was in awe of everything he did anymore. George moved closer, every ounce of his body wanting to hear what Wilbur had to say next. Then 5 years ago he came here. Wilbur was just one of his hands. He told me, "Willie, do you remember that story I used to tell you?" And I said, "Of course." Then he told me that's why he came. I was confused. Why would he visit me just to ask if I remembered one of his fictional stories? Wilbur sat in silence for a bit, constantly sniffing and blowing into a tissue. He told me he was telling the truth. The story was true. Wilbur started messing with his sleeve. I thought he'd gone crazy. I was about to kick him out of the house, but he wouldn't budge. He's so persistent. George knew that. Oh, did he know that? Wilbur patted his jeans pocket and took out his old, worn-out leather book. He threw this at me, before I closed the door at him. He showed it to George. He said it was proof he was telling the truth. He opened a page and showed it to George. It had a series of dates with little notes on the side. July 31st, 2020. George and Barry's time capsule. August 5/13. George repaints the exterior of his house dark blue. I chose that color. August 27th, 2020. George and Barry's another time capsule. August 28th, 2020. George plants flowers. I know him well enough to know he'll struggle. George now knew the true reason why Wilbur had kept this notebook so close to him. Why he often wrote in it when he was with George. Wilbur took the notebook back. This one's my favorite, showed George. September 2nd. I forgot to call George today. Whoever this goes to, please keep him company. George remembered. Is that why you came to my house randomly for apple cider? Wilbur smiled. Yes, he confirmed. I wasn't initially going to fact check these dates, but I felt bad for him, so I went on the day you buried the time capsule, and there you were. I went more and more and saw that each date we wrote down had come true. He was telling the truth. His feels heart warmed. Even though Dream had never visited him before, he was always there for him the whole time without him noticing. In little ways, but ways nevertheless. May I see the phone, George? Oh, Wilbur said. Yes, upstairs in my room. George led Wilbur up the carpet steps to his bedroom. It was messy and he didn't have the energy to clean it lately, so he was a bit embarrassed, but Wilbur didn't seem to mind. Wilbur kept constantly checking the clock. It was 9:21. Have to be somewhere? George asked, and Wilbur shook his head. I just grew a habit of checking the time, he explained. 9:24. The phone rang. Is that him? Wilbur asked. George ran to the phone, longing to hear his dream voice, longing to talk to him, knowing there was some version of him that was still alive. He didn't even consider how off it was that he called in the morning. Dream never called in the morning. I don't know. I don't think I should talk to him, Wilbur. Wilbur said briefly. I don't think I should talk to him, Wilbur said briefly. I don't know if I can bring myself to, and it also might mess up things, right? He didn't know how any of it worked. He just assumed that it was safer not to risk anything. George nodded quickly at Wilbur. He didn't have anything on his mind other than answering Dream. He wiped his eyes and gave a huge sigh and picked up the phone. Dream? Hi, George. Dream, you have no idea how happy I am to hear your voice. George almost wailed. It's been so long. Dream was silent from his end for a moment. Remember that handprint I put on your wall and how you freaked out when I asked if you held it? George was lost. He didn't understand how Dream could start conversations with such a big mind. But he didn't care as long as he could hear his voice. I do. Why do you ask? I know you held it, George. James and boldly. I know how you felt. I know how you feel. Dream was wrong. He had no idea how you felt. He had no idea what he had seen the night before. How do I feel? What are you talking about? George didn't even care that Wilbur was still in the room. He talked as if it was just him and Dream in the room. You faltered, Dream continued. when I say something that goes a little too far, when I call you adorable, when I tell you I miss you. Dream, can you just cut to this and get to the point? George snapped, and Dream's breath caught for a moment, almost as though he wasn't expecting this kind of reaction from George. Dream closed his eyes, his legs shaking rapidly under his desk. George, I love you, he said. Well, I love your voice. I love how absolutely dense you are sometimes, even though you're one of the smartest people I know. And the way you answer the phone so fast when I call, and I love the hello dreams and the goodnight old mans, and I even love how stupidly long you take to say you miss me back. Shoot, and I love when you tell me I'm full of myself, and how much you don't want me to shut up. But George, I don't want to shut up. I don't want to stop talking to you. George held his phone in his feeble, unsteady hand, his tears and his eyes glossy with a layer of salty tears. And I just want you to love me back. I don't care if you say I'm full of myself. I know you love me back, so say it. Please, George. I need to hear you say it at least once. I know you'll mean it, so let's just get this over with. George asked for help. Get this over with, George repeated. Is that what you think this is? Are you trying to coax me into telling you I love you just to get it over with? You don't understand what I did, George. Dream to kind of try to calm him down. You don't say it now, you'll never get another chance. What are you talking about, Dream? What is this? Why did you call me just to tell me this? George was full of emotion between watching Dream before his last moment in life and being on the phone with his past self, pouring his heart out. He didn't know how to feel. Fine then, let me make this easier. Dream scuffed a little before taking a deep breath. Tell me you don't love me. You wanted me to tell you I love you, now you just want me to say I don't? George was being sassy, and he was just genuinely confused. Can you do that? Dream pushed. Can you handle saying that? Which one of those two phrases would be true, and which one of them would be a lie if you told me right now? George was silent. Please, George, please, I need to hear it. All George could remember was arguing with Dream in the hospital the night before. How he told him that no matter what, he'd still find a way to talk to him over the phone. That was his first and last memory of seeing George in person. An argument. He didn't want another argument with Dream, so he collapsed. I love you too, Dream. Dream sniffed, his voice uneven. Thank you. That's what I needed, George. You needed me to tell you I love you? Dream didn't answer. He just sat on the stool, clutching his phone so hard he thought it might crack into pieces. I need closure, he admitted. Proof that once upon 1970, George Davidson, a man who didn't even exist yet, had loved me. How are we going to continue to talk after this? George asked curiously. Now that we know how I feel. I'm sorry, George. A single tear fell down Dream's face. It's funny. You say time can heal wounds, but never how time can be the one to create them. George felt a breath catch in his throat after hearing that. What's going on? 9:30. Whoever came up behind George had forgotten he was even there. George, I just wanted to say one thing, and that's thank you. Dream's voice was so broken, and George found something off-putting about it. Thank you for the way you talk, stories you tell, everything. You changed my life, that's for sure. Just can't have my heart in 2020 when it belongs here in 1970. I'll fall for you more and more and more if I go any deeper. I won't be able to get out of it. Maybe in another life, you and I were together happily. But the way I want it to be, the way it should be. But it's just, Jim stopped talking for himself to give him, talking for a moment to give himself time to cry. Bad crying, bad timing, he finished. George was annoyingly crying out as well. He was still confused. Did this mean Dream would never talk to him again? Why would he do such a cruel thing? He didn't know that was what he witnessed him die. Now this? Dream, what does this mean? I love you. Dream interrupted. I love you too, bud. That's all that needs to be said. Dream just stopped talking. But he said one final thing. You take good care of those flowers, George. Dream hadn't hung up, but was silent. Wilbur appeared next to him. George, he said, I'm sorry, but he had one last request of me. George didn't understand why so many people were being so cryptic to him at once. All he wanted was an explanation. An explanation was what he got when he saw Wilbur pull out a red Swiss Army knife. And with Dream, with warmth, we'll meet again. Wilbur, what are you? George raised his voice, but found himself wrestling the phone from Wilbur. Wilbur, grabbed hold of the phone, clutched it in his strong, shaking hand. With one slash of a knife, he cut the cord. There was no explosion or open time, or a bright light to indicate any change, just the cord breaking. The phone fell clean on the floor. It was the end of any more calls from Dream. Dream sat on the stool, and he knew the moment the cord was cut. The dial tone just rang loudly in his ear, but he kept the phone close to him, almost waiting for one more word, but nothing came. He didn't know how long he sat there, and he couldn't even bring himself to cry. He just held the phone the way he had held it when he talked to George. George fell to the ground, trying to grab hold of the phone. Why did you do that? He wailed, trying desperately to put the pieces of cord back together. There was no hope. Wilbur didn't falter or back away. He just ripped the last page of his notebook out and handed it to George, whose tears fell in the ink, blotting the ink slightly. To my next of kin, a friend, or whoever pass these note on to, I know I've asked so much from you, and make one last request. On September 9th, 2020, 9:30 a.m., I would like you to please sever my telephone connection with George permanently. Tell him I hope he moves on, and that the world will give him everything that he deserves. Someone to love him, someone to hold him, and tell him how beautiful he is. That is the end of my requests. However I choose to fulfill them, I want to say thank you, and to have a beautiful day. George read over the note over and over again. Dream had no idea what he had just done to him. George had seen Dream die twice. Any version of him and any connection with him was gone forever. Wilbur helped his friend up and let him cry, comforting them. They had both lost a lot that day. The orange petal of calendula's peeked out of the dirt. It was beginning to live, and had no idea how much had just died. The last chapter. Clay had finally put the phone down. He had never touched it and avoided looking at it again. He just couldn't bring himself to. He moved out of his house shortly after. He had done so multiple times before settling in England. There, he found a lovely woman named Ophelia, whom he married. The couple eventually were expecting their first child, and had been unsure of the name until Ophelia found a sticky note with Wilbur scrawled on it. She had asked Clay what the word meant, but he denied any knowledge of what it meant or where it came from. After some convincing, Clay agreed to name their first child Wilbur. Wilbur had grown up a happy childhood with loving parents who gave him everything he ever wanted or needed. Clay would tell him bedtime stories every night. Sometimes Nick would come by and share some tales too. After a few years after, Ophelia was expecting another son. Around the same time, Clay's friend Techno had lost his long fought with cancer. Clay's second child was nicknamed Techno in his memory. Clay continued to keep his notebooks of dates near him, planning to go visit George Davidson himself. Couldn't bring himself to. So he turned to the person who would leave him, Wilbur. He had continued to live a good life and full life, never forgetting the boy he spoke with on the phone. George stared at the handprints on the wall every night for weeks on end, until he noticed something written under them. I love you, it read. He had placed his hand on top of Dream's handprint and crumbled, listening to unchained melody until he fell asleep. Every night, taking in the words and cursing time. Well, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch a long, lonely time. And time goes by slowly, and time can do so much. Are you still mine? I need your love. All he heard was Dream's voice. The photo of young Clay lay on his desk, framed and untouched. He had kept every promise he had made Dream. He took care of the flowers, in which 2 had bloomed. One was kept in George's yard to grow and live, while the other was cut and placed on Dream's grave. After a while, he realized that what Dream did wasn't selfish, and that it was an act of love. It was a cliche. If you love them, let them go. George was let go. Eventually, George had gone outside for the first time in a month. He smelled the fresh fall air. Remembered that the last request Dream had ever made to him was to live his life. So that's what he did. There was no explanation to or answers about why, one day, at the end of July, both in 1970 and 2020, the phone call had been so powerful enough to break time. Neither George nor Clay had gone looking for any, nor told anybody about the phone calls. The phone calls, however, unexplainable and impossible, and all of their contents were still little secrets. The calls have defined every law of time and space there was, but it was no match for how much it had changed 2 young men's lives. The connection of those 2 hearts was stronger than the magic that brought them together. So however painful and tragic the end of this story became to you, now you know that once upon a time, in the same room, of the same house, 50 years apart, Clay and George had loved each other. Okay, so that was the end of the story. Please, so I want this to be a suggested thing. I'm pretty sure I already said that. I haven't listened to this from the beginning because I hate my voice. But please suggest anything, any fandom, any kind of webhead on any app. Like, I know I figured I'd get, like, a lot of people to like this. It's something simple, and also it's easy and audible, because I know there's many times in my life that I've been wanting to be able to listen to a Wattpad story and not read it. So I'm sorry if my voice sucked, because I know it does. And if audio is bad, if enough people request it, I will redo it. So yeah, just please let me know. This was made in like 2 days. This took so long, and I mostly made most of it at night. And you have no idea how much this fucking took. And I'm so sorry for cursing. I'm so excited I actually did it. And this was actually to my friend. I suggested the story to him, and he has been really busy. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to make a video of me reading it for him. And then he suggested that I make it into a channel. So, yeah, sorry, I'm just really rushed right now. I'm really happy I finally did it. So yeah, please subscribe or like or comment if you like this. I feel like that sounds cliche to ask, but yeah, yeah, again, suggest anything, and I'm sorry for the background.